that are in the house for the record, and then I'm going to ask those that are online to also introduce yourselves. Next to me is Ms. Wasima Kamish Ahmad. Let me not make that mistake again. And she is the procedural officer for the standing committee. And then also we have Masintle, and then we have Siraj, who is supporting us in IT this afternoon. Thank you, members. And I also want to ask you to don't do a long statement. Please try and get to your question as quick as possible. Thank you. I am taking this round. Did I note you? Yes. And Member Frankhuis and Member Beret in that order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks to the Premier and the DG for those comments. Chair, I'm just going straight to the APP, and because I presume that the Premier probably summarized what he's saying. But if you look at page 1 of the APP, the Premier in his statement says that in addition, our department is empowered by the Constitution of the Republic and the Western Cape, as well as relevant provincial legislation and the Public Service Act. And together these laws guide our approach to delivering services to the people of this province. Now, I would just like to draw your attention to chapter 10 of the Western Cape Provincial Constitution, which refers to directives of provincial policy. And it's clause 81, and it says that the Western Cape government must adopt and implement policies to actively promote and maintain the welfare of the people of the Western Cape, including policies aimed at achieving the following: safety and security, and this is the two that I'm referring to specifically, the promotion of non-racialism in the Western Cape, and then C, the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. My question to the Premier is, can you point to anything in this annual performance plan which specifically advances persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination? Can you point to anything in this APP that does that? Or can you point to anything in provincial policy which actually specifically advances people? And we all know that in terms of employment equity, those South Africans who were classified by the apartheid government as colored, as African, are regarded, and women are regarded as people who suffered from unfair discrimination. Secondly, Premier, I would like to ask you whether you would agree that the senior management of this department from Chief Director up should generally be representative of the people of the Western Cape. How do you feel about the fact that there is one, as far as we can work out, because I've looked in the whole APP, Chair, and I've tried to find where I see there's one table on disability in terms of senior management, but maybe I can be directed to which page in the APP refers to the current representativity. But my understanding is that there is one African person from Chief Director up. Do you think it's acceptable in the context of trying to build, as you say, a prosperous society for all, that the senior management of the very department that leads this province is completely unrepresentative of the people of this Western Cape? Those are my first two questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, members. And Member Dugmore has now started it, and he started on page 1, as he said, in the APP. I'm going to revise myself, and I'm going to include the executive statement of the Premier and the statement of the DG, as well as the forward as they spoke to us And then in regard to the budget, I'm going to also include pages 1 to 10. Okay? All right. Member Brankhuis.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, and thank you very much to the Premier also, the presentation. My question is to the DG that we know that cybersecurity is a very important issue, not only locally here in the Western Cape, but nationally also and internationally also is a very, very, very pertinent issue. My question is to the DG that can they confirm that there has been any security breach here in the Western Cape government or in any of the municipalities all around the Western Cape? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, short and sweet. Member Marie.
Thank you so much, Chair. Yes, there's not much a person can criticize really on this budget. I like the Premier's statement that the Western Cape is a special place with special people, to quote him. He spent a lot in this budget on infrastructure and the only question, and job creation, of course, but the only question I have is a concern that while they make special notice about HIV, nothing is said of diabetes. It's just COVID and HIV. And we know that global stats show that 50% and more of diabetics are undiagnosed. Now, I know that the city of Cape Town is the only city in South Africa who joined the Global Partnership for Healthy Cities. And that's a very proactive approach which should be complimented on. But I want to know, sir, how much are we giving attention to screening people to identify individuals who are at high risk for diabetes? Because as you know, diabetes has a lot of negatives. People get amputated their legs and they get kidney failures and all that. And it's one of the comorbidities that if you have it undiagnosed and you contract COVID, your chances of survival is slim, very slim. Western Cape has a 96% recovery rate from COVID. And I wondered if it's not that 4%. It's not because they had diabetics and that if they were all tested, then they were, shall I say, given the necessary chronic medication, we could easily have sliced off another 2% and had a 98% success in recovery rate. So that's my only question. What are we doing to screen more people for diabetics to make sure that they get the treatment that they should get to give them a far better chance of surviving, even if they should get COVID? Thank you.
Member Marie, can I just get clarity? Your question, where was the actual question without a long haul? Just if you can clarify for me, please. Member Marie.
Is there a special focus on fighting diabetics also in the health budget and not only COVID and HIV?
Thank you, sir. Member Allen.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Based on your revised input in terms of certain pages, thank you that I'm able to pose my questions at this stage. First, I want to say thank you to the Premier and the DG. My one question is maybe linked. The DG made mention in terms of his remarks and his executive statement regarding that the department is committed to the effective implementation of the 2022-2023 annual performance plan. And in light of those remarks, I do know, and it should be commended, that .P would have less than 1% vacancy rate within that department. But if the DG can share on any plans in place to ensure that the vacancy rate across the government is as low as possible, I think that would be key to ensure that we have the human resources. The second one, person, is in terms of corporate communication, which is page 4 of the vote. I'm delighted to be able to speak to people that have seen the communication, the boards on the roads, etc. And that is really helping residents to engage better even with the government. But I wanted to check on the APP, there's reference made in terms of ad hoc services. That there's a split between 75 and 25%. Would the DG be able to explain what some of those ad hoc services would be, especially in the light of the learnings from the last 2 years and how we see to cater for that for the upcoming year? Also because I can appreciate that the annual demand planning takes extensive preparation and work. And then my last one, Chairperson, is also on page 4, is the legal services. I do know in terms of what we have done in the city of Cape Town, where there's an agreement in place with the city of Cape Town in terms of the LEAP officers, and that is specific to the agreement between the city and the transfer payment agreement. And I do know now that we are extending that to areas outside of the metro areas like Grabouw, all the way up until Grabouw, Ceres and Malmesbury, whether the DG is doing any of this, any feedback in terms of those agreements with other municipalities and other stakeholders, specifically to the safety plan. I think that would, those answers will be helpful to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Member Allen. Member Klego, welcome.
Thanks, and thanks for the opportunity. Mine would be under the core functions on page 2, where it states that the core functions and responsibilities. It is mentioned that that one of the roles of the department is to coordinate the functions of provincial administration and its department through development and implementation of legislation and policy. Now, in light of the above, is the Western Cape government policy there to support emerging black farmers with access to land? Is there anything that the department is doing in that regard? And then also, if so, is the land available for emerging black farmers? And if so, then how many are benefiting under the current government? And then the second question is, why is the provincial government not making agricultural land farming available to emerging black farmers? And how will the provincial government be deemed to be responsible to medium-term strategic framework? Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Premier, DG, that's the round. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair, and to the honourable members for the questions. I think, first of all, to the Honourable Dugmore, thank you very much for your question. First of all, I want to say to you that absolutely the Constitution gives us our mandate. It gives us our steer. And in actual fact, both of these documents speak absolutely to unfair discrimination, and the correction thereof speaks to redress and making the biggest difference that we can to bridge that divide that existed in our country post apartheid and as we came into this new dispensation under this very constitution. So whether it is the focus on jobs, dignity, on well-being, and on safety, if you have a look at where those focus areas are, they're exactly in the areas that we're speaking about. If I even break it down even further, down to say free Wi-Fi access, if I look at how we make that available and where we make it available. If I think about how we're looking at it going forward from an infrastructure point of view and enabling infrastructure, it's about redress. It's about dealing with the discrimination that our citizens have felt and how we correct that and how we build towards a better future. If I think about just mobility and looking at how we want to look at mobility in our region, considering that the infrastructure failures, which are actually exacerbating the failed and the old planning system of the apartheid years, and how even a failed mobility system is actually making it worse and not better. It is discriminating even further to the poorest of the poor in our region, and how we really have to think so differently on how we engage and how we make sure that we are building a better province. And then, of course, you talk about how it gets measured. And I will say to you absolutely that if you look at, if you wanted to categorize racially people in top management, absolutely. I think we probably definitely need to have more Black Africans in our top management. I think you need to judge myself and this government, not year by year, but have a look at the difference that happens over a period of time. And I promise you the top management of this government looks very different to what it looked like 3 years ago. And wait, if I have a look at what Cabinet's going to sign off at the next Cabinet meeting, it will change again, both from a disability point of view as well as, a Black African point of view. Absolutely, we will continue to work towards it. At the same time, obviously, you must have a look and see who've reached the end of their career and what they have given back to this, the citizens of this province. And of course, some people there are the vacancies, the very vacancies that the DG has been speaking about. And we've taken a conscious decision not to fill every single vacancy. We know in South Africa, it's a major, major problem. Where our budgets are not enabling us to have massive administrations. We've got to get a lot more with a lot less. And that means financially with a lot more delivery with a lot less money. And we've got to get a lot more delivery with a lot less people. And it's going to be a difficult journey that our country is going to face over the next few years if we are to get things right. And so, yeah, when you do the bean counting, you can say, yes, have a look here and there. But really, I think you need to judge this this government in a 3-year cycle of what we've achieved in the last 3 years. And I promise you, you will see even after the next Cabinet meeting, you'll see change again. And we will continue working towards those kind of North Stars of building a better province, a better region, and doing it both internally and everything that we do externally as well. To the Honourable Brinkhuis, I'll let the DG talk about the actual detail, and maybe even someone from Hilton can actually talk about how many times our system gets attacked every single day. It blows your mind. And I know one municipality that had their details were not all of them. Luckily, they did have some good systems in place, so a bit of their data was held ransom. And it is a big issue, and it's, as the DG has said now, we're putting quite a lot more money into it. We've seen what happened to Transnet and the ports. When your systems and cybercrime is majorly detrimental to services. And you can imagine a government and the kind of sensitive information that we hold in our data systems. If you think about the 17, 18 million records that we hold in our system, just from the health department and the kind of health records we hold of our citizens. You would never want that to be attacked from a cybercrime point of view and held to ransom. and every single department has got major data that needs to be protected. But DG and I think the team can add to that. Then the Honourable Marais, obviously this is the Premier's department, and quite a lot of what you're asking actually hits the ground in the health department. Whether it's HIV, tuberculosis, TB is a major issue for us specifically in this province, or as you say, diabetics as well and diabetes. And of course, that you will see all of those focus areas on specifically diabetics, but also on TB. I mean, I chair the HIV committee where I've actually changed the name now to HIV and tuberculosis, because TB and HIV are so intertwined. So often you will find if someone suffers from HIV, they have TB as well, or vice versa. They become much more vulnerable. So we brought those two together. I mean, just as if you think about the campaigns in the past about know your status on HIV, the same campaign is being run now about know your status on tuberculosis. It really is critical. And I agree with you absolutely. You should know your status on diabetes as well. But I must say, in this last while fighting COVID-19, I think the kind of work that the department did, the health department around the vector program, specifically for diabetics, should be recognized globally. I mean, you know that if in the beginning stages 2 years ago, if you were a diabetic, you ended up in one of our ICU units on a ventilator, your chances of coming off that ventilator and walking home were just about naught. You had 100% chance of dying when you were put on that ventilator. Move on a few months and the intervention programs, and that 100% chance of not making it came down to 4.5% if you were in an ICU on a ventilator, 4.5%. I mean, they did unbelievable work on really mitigating risks on diabetes. But I think the real area for answering your specific questions will be in the health department, but perhaps there is someone here from policy or wants to maybe add in something to that question that you asked. The Honourable Allen, you spoke about the LEAP contract, and I think DG can also speak a little bit more to that. And of course, as we expand it, I think specifically the legal team, making sure that we get these contracts right, that we build the relationships between local government, provincial government, national government, especially in areas where we are doing new things that have never been done before. It's critical that we get them right. But I'm sure that DG can answer further questions on that, especially as we grow out to, as you say, Grabouw, Ceres, and Malmesbury, and a lot of municipalities saying they would like to have more agreements with us. The Honourable Klego, thank you very much. I think also what you ask, much of it is within the agricultural department. And also I want to say that also about policy and whose job it is. We have a National Department of Land Reform whose job that is. I know that, and I can answer some of these questions that you asked because of just my knowledge of that department. But of course, the role, and the Honourable Doug started with a constitution, and I must say that we try often to say, well, how do we find ways within the constitution to also push some boundaries? If I think around the land issue, and it's still a big problem. Land ownership, specifically of black farmers, and how do we get that percentage to change markedly? It's still way too low. But our role from a constitutional point of view, and what we can do with the budgets that we've got versus the actual policy at a national level. I've spoken about this before, that the national department's policy is not to give land ownership, but to lease the land. And even there, I don't think that they get it right. Those leases are not long enough. They take too long to get in place. And I think most farmers fail before they even get a lease in the system. I think, Chair, I've covered those questions. I'm going to just see if DG wants to add, or anybody else wants to add to some of those questions.
Thank you. Premier, maybe I should just continue with where you ended. I mean, on the policy around emerging farmers, I mean, if Member Tejo goes to the budget for agriculture, it's vote 11, under program 3, I mean, there's a specific program that deals with producer support services, and it particularly deals with black commercial farmers that's been supported. So they use two mechanisms, primarily through CASP and also primarily through their grant. And they spend about 275 million in aggregate on that program. And that's a substantial, it's a sizable portion of the budget of agriculture. And if one thinks about the budget being less than R1 billion, so there's lots of activity, particularly in supporting emerging black farmers, and then also assisting them to actually become, you know, real commercial farmers in the system. And I mean, if there are any more questions on that, I'd also propose that that then be asked directly to the department. But I think Member Tejo can just consult the budget book. On the question that's been asked by Member Allen on particularly our commitments, I can say our vacancy rate at the moment is less than 1%. I mean, I've spoken about our replacement rate of being 1 out of 3 vacancies. And then obviously the key thing there is, and I mean, I spoke to Mr. Jumat this morning, you get to a point where you really need to consider whether you're going to actually fund and fill some of the senior positions, because you can get to a point where it just becomes very difficult for you to do what you need to do. But funding remains a major constraint, and we've taken a deliberate decision to rather use our money and put it into some of our key programs while we're keeping the department afloat. Just in relation to the vacancy rate, obviously across the entire government, most departments sits with at less than 2% at the moment because of the constraint, but also because of the fact that most of them have taken deliberate decisions to rather mainstream and to focus on some of our programs. I mean, Hilton can talk to the detail on security breaches, but I mean, Member Brinkhuis, you can also understand, given the public nature of this meeting, we do not want to go into the detail. Because, I mean, people listen in, and if you say, I've got security risk in the following area, then tomorrow you get those attacks. The only thing I can say, Chair, and I want to assure the committee, that we've got a proper plan on how to deal with cyber security issues. I do not want to even talk about, you know, the number of attacks on the system and how many of them were able to get in. But the key thing I can just say is that we're monitoring it. It is a risk, but I think as the accounting officer, I can say confidently to this committee that it is a risk that we are managing, and that is why we've made a substantial investment into upping our game as it relates to that matter, because of the number of employees, but also the number of citizens that we have. So I'm not going to go into detail, particularly around the matter. Just as an AO again on the issue of, I think our representativity, Premier spoke about it. I mean, we've just recently appointed another senior manager, you know, that forms part of the differently abled grouping in the Department of the Premier, and we're very proud of it. And obviously, we are looking, you know, at further representation across our department. I mean, for us, diversity is key. And I mean, I personally believe in a more diverse institution because it just takes you further. And I mean, we will not even apologize for being more diverse in the system, but obviously we also look at people's capacity, you know, ability, and then obviously, you know, growing them into the system. So I agree with Premier. It is something that we are working on. I'm going to ask Driekus just to talk about this whole issue around some of the ad hoc services, particularly in the communications environment. And then Hilton, if you want to say something on the cybersecurity, feel free to do that. Just on the last issue raised by Member Marais on the issue of diabetes. As part of our employee health and wellness program in the department, we drive it. And then obviously also as part of the entire COVID plan, COVID response for Western Cape government employees. You know, the target of people that has got diabetes, linking it to obviously the issue around COVID risk, those were part of our question. But we've got an integrated employee health and wellness program where we pull in all these initiatives as it relates to the department of the Premier. I think I have addressed everything. I just want to ask Hilton and then Driekus just talk about the one issue. Hilton?
Thanks, DG. So on the issue of cybersecurity, at the outbreak of COVID-19, we were acutely aware of the fact that cyber activity, cyber hacking activity will escalate once the officials are starting is going to work from home. And that's why our own information security team, we stepped up our efforts also, and we were more vigilant at that stage to ensure that we do not get hacked during that specific period. However, as it relates to our interventions, there's various interventions that we then undertook during the period over the past 18 months in terms of cybersecurity awareness amongst our staff, making sure that we beef up our cybersecurity at the edge, because most of our staff now went home and they work from home. So we need to make sure that those devices are secured because they're not working in a confined space anymore. And also making sure that our detection processes and systems are beefed up. And our network monitoring tools are also monitored not at a regular basis, 24/7. It's not a regular 24/7, and we have a team that's doing that. So yes, on the as I've DJ's indicated, we do not want to divulge any info pertaining to breaches. Primus mentioned there's 1 or 2 municipalities which we do not want to mention, but we are able to provide that as a closed report to the committee, so that if the committee so requires. But as the DJ said, this is a public forum, so we'd not like to divulge any information. But we can also do DG a presentation to the standing committee on our cybersecurity efforts in terms of what we're doing in that space, because it's a lot happening in that space. We've done presentations to the audit committees, in closed sessions to the audit committees, and that same presentation we can do to the standing committee.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the communication, corporate communications happens across the province. There's 13 departments that communicate throughout the year. Now, what we have implemented a number of years ago is demand planning, where we then engage on the plans for communication. There's then communication plans, and as you know, with communication, if there's a crisis during the year or there's a special issue that requires communication, it would not be in the plan. But we're saying at this point, 75% is as planned, which I think in the comms environment is a reasonable percentage for us to work out our workloads and so on. So 25% at this point is ad hoc, but that's understandable. Thank you.
Thank you very much to those responses. I'm just checking. Anybody want to follow up on a response? I note you. Please, I'm asking again, Member Dagmo, before you start, work with me. Follow-up question. Okay. And then I note Member Maseko, and I take it that is a new question because you have not asked anything. Members on the in Teams, I note Member Marais. Member Marais, I take it that is also a follow-up.
That's what you asked for, Chair Lady.
Okay, Member Marais, Member Dagmo, and Member Marais.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a follow-up question, I'm not sure, Chair, whether the Premier didn't fully understand the question that I was asking, because if you look at the directives of provincial policy, it says the Western Cape government must, right? So there's not it must adopt and implement policies. And then I've raised 2 issues, the promotion of non-racialism and the protection or advancement of persons or categories disadvantaged. So I would like to ask, can you name a single policy, because you've got a directorate of policy in your own, can you name a single policy which does that, promotes non-racialism and policies which protect or advance persons? That's my question. I would like you to specifically, okay, I'll read the provincial constitution to you. It says that the Western Cape government must adopt and implement, so the issue is must adopt and implement policies, that's provincial policies now, to actively promote and maintain the welfare of the people of the Western Cape, including policies aimed at achieving, and then 81B, the promotion of non-racialism in the Western Cape, and C, the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. So my question was, can you mention one policy in the provincial government and the page of that policy which specifically promotes non-racialism or protects or advances? I'd just like to, so my question is, can you please mention, given us that it's a directive of provincial policy that this is what must be done, can you mention any policy which promotes that. And then my second follow-up question relates to my question about representativity. Could you tell us where in the APP there is a diagram which reflects the current representativity of senior management and the plans to make the senior management more representative? Because we believe the senior management must include people who've been classified as white, colored, African, but you've agreed, and your DG has agreed, that it's not satisfactory. So where in this APP is there the current reflection of that representativity, and where is the plan to change that so that it becomes more representative? That's the follow-up.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. Member Murray.
Thank you. I'm encouraged by the response I got from the Premier, and I'm aware that it's a health issue. But I'm also aware that he's the boss of his cabinet, and he can give any task to any of his ministers. That's his prerogative. That's why I put the question to him. I wanted to know whether there was a special focus on diabetes and whether he's prepared to take control of it in light of him saying that he's prepared for resurgence of the fifth wave. And he also at the same time said that the state of disaster should expire. So I thought that while he's got all his wickets covered, I know he's a keen sportsman, and if he tell me his wickets are covered in the case of diabetics also, I'll be happy. But that's why I put the question, because I would have liked him to put a special focus on diabetes from a point of him being chairman of his cabinet, so that we can be sure that this will not be the cause that there's a resurgence in non-recoveries in terms of COVID, because we haven't done sufficient screening. But if he says he's got his eye on the ball, then I would like him to say it. Thank you.
Thank you. Premier, TG.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Back to the Honourable Dugmore. I want to say that all of our policies promote non-racialism, every single one of them. And DG will actually give you the detail on in the actual current book. I also want to say to the Honourable Murray that I can assure you that in our own cabinet, I do lead from the front, being a diabetic myself. And of course, also trying new things and different things. You will note if you engage with the Honourable Shana Fernandes, she can also talk about a program both she and I have been on, which is led by a Dr. Shah from India, along with some doctors in the US, as well as some doctors here, trying new things so that we can actually try to influence how things happen within our government, and leading from the front, both members of cabinet doing exactly that. And then, of course, I can assure the honourable member that within the department, we understand the risk. This is a massive risk. It really is, and you can see it more and more across the board. But I also want to say that I think the focus that has been put onto diabetes and diabetics in fighting COVID-19 has been remarkable. As I said in the beginning, I think it should be winning certain awards globally for all the work that they've done. Definitely, I think, outstanding.
Excuse me, I didn't hear what the Premier said. Second part, he said in response to my question on non-racialism that all. I just want to repeat my question. I said mention one policy and where in that policy both promotes non-racialism and secondly protection of. So you said I want to know, just mention one policy and where in that policy it specifically promotes non-racism and category 81C, advanced persons historically disadvantaged. So just
thank you, Member Dugmore. I think we got it just now.
Where in that policy?
Chair, I mean, if you go to our APP, you will see on page 47, we talk about interventions relating to women, children, youth, and people with disabilities. So on a transversal basis, I mean, we follow also some of the frameworks, particularly as it relates to gender responsive planning, budgeting, and monitoring. And then also, if you look at page 61 of our indicators, you can also see that we deal there with human rights-based transversal programs that's institutionalized across Western Cape government. And in fact, we provide a report to Provincial Cabinet on all those things at least twice per annum. Then the third issue, Chair, because we're also responsible for recruitment and stuff, I mean, that also relates to issues of gender. I mean, we've got, as part of our suite of policies, we've got, an employment policy. And in that policy, we specifically deal with issues around employment equity, particular targeting. And in fact, we also have an employment equity plan that's put together by each department. And it also pulls in, the issue of succession planning. And then just lastly, we're also obviously working or align ourselves to the 8 principles for promoting women empowerment and gender equality. And that falls directly under my own stewardship in our own department. And then on page 48, we also address, these in a little bit more detail with regards to even some of the guidelines and stuff that we have. Then just lastly on employment, I mean, it's also key to note, even when we, make certain proposals for employing particularly senior management staff, there are 3 categories. So we look at, firstly, does the appointment promote gender equality? That's either yes or no. Does it promote, employment equity in the broader terms? And does it then also promote the issue around disability? So it's generally 3 categories, and the departments must answer on that. And when it gets to cabinet, cabinet questions them on that. And it goes back, to our own recruitment plan, but also to your own institutional plan that you actually have as a department. And then, Chair, if you look at page 46, because I think it also connects, you can see in terms of the total number of employees with disabilities, and it cuts across the entire category. So you can see, as an example, in our department, I mean, we've got 25 people, and that's broken down into African, colored, Indian, and white, and then obviously also in terms of gender. And that's also an issue around, promoting gender equality, but also the whole issue around human rights. So we take it serious, and we obviously also talk about this, at PTM level. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I am moving on. Member Maseko.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And also, I just want to congratulate the Premier's Department with the gender-based, gender-responsive planning for budgeting and monitoring. I think it's long overdue that we do have Premier that has to drive this gender-responsive budgeting. Just from that space, I just want to find out, Premier, because I usually take this department as an enabler for the other departments or portfolios within the province. Now, when we have the interventions that it's going to be implemented within the department to women, children, youth, and the people with disabilities, how is this department going to filter that to the local government, to the municipalities, because most of the end users are there. And then where this is happening, because we are now on the pandemic of the GBV, it's in those municipalities. So we can champion within the province, but the basics, which is the local government, that's where we have to see the difference. And more especially as you do the introduction of the APP indicator monitoring system, we have to see whatever that we are implementing within the department, it's working within the municipalities. So I just want to find out the strategy that maybe you're going to come up with to see that within the municipalities, you do have the buy-in for them to also, as they do their IDP plans, to also try to cover the gender-based and budgeting to make sure that they empower women, all those things that you are going to try to develop and implement within the province. How are you going to go about? And the second one, it will be the relationship within the province and the city. I mean, like I said, that this department is just the enabler in principle. Now for investments, the infrastructure plays an important role. We have seen the city returning the USDG fund for so many years, of which that grant was supposed maybe to be spent within the city to make sure that the infrastructure is up to the level that it can be. And that didn't happen. Now I want to find out that when you are with the city trying to promote these investors and using the grant, because the budget cut is happening, that's the reality of what we are facing now. How are you going to be innovative to make sure that you skill also? Because one of the issues that we have identified, I think throughout the other portfolios, was a skills development within the local government. So for the local government workers, whether being in the city or other municipalities that don't use the grant that they receive from the national. So you as the department that is an enabler, you as the department that has to champion the investors to come in, and then having this grant that is within the city, and I'm making an example just with the city. How are you going to make sure that you come up with the innovative way of helping those municipalities to upskill those municipalities or upskill the city to make sure that they get the knowledge of when they have the grant, the planning, and also how do you champion that samenwerking with the other municipalities for that investors? Because we also have to look at the other municipalities. Your Drakenstein is growing as we speak now, which eventually it filters the influx of the people within the city to go to the neighboring cities, but neighboring towns. But if we don't have the system to make sure that we skill the other municipalities that are growing rapidly, so it's going to be that we have the problems that we are facing within here, and the sewer system and any other thing. Presently, they cannot cope with the number of the communities that are within the city. So how do we go about to make sure that as the premier and as the department, you can say that this is the innovation that we have, this is the program that we are going to implement to make sure that we empower those municipalities for their LED programs as they do the IDP plans, and also for making sure that the investors, they see other towns where the towns can sell themselves. You go to Robertson, they can say we have about 62 wine producers. It can sell itself to say that, okay, let's have the tourism going there. But if we don't have the skills there that can be used from the employee side of the municipalities, there's no way that can be acknowledged or can be seen that there is something like that in Robertson, and say the tourism can move away from Cape Town sometimes and have the direct tourists going directly to your municipality like Langeberg, concentrating on the Robertson. I think that's all for
Thank you, Member Maseko. Premier, DG.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think, first of all, to the Honourable Maseko, I think I first want to answer your question by saying the structure in which we operate. So you've asked specific questions, but I think in the bigger scheme of things, and I'll talk about the PCF. So that's a regular engagement where the whole of our government engages with all of local government. But not only and exclusively, because at that platform we'll also bring in, it could be SAPS would come in, or ESCOM would come in, or we'll be the Public Service Commission is coming to the next one. DG and I met with the Public Service Commission the other day, and they're going to come to the PCF. So we identify, the Auditor General comes to we identify areas or issues where we would say at maybe a local government level, I think this is something we all need to talk about. And it also works the other way around. Local government can also say to us, you know, we think we need to talk about land invasions. And then that would become a topic of the PCF, and we'd bring in whoever we need to bring in so that we can learn from which municipalities are doing it well. And then through that process, identify focus areas or shortcomings. I also think about even the Budget Policy Committee. So the Budget Policy Committee would be myself and DG with Minister Mania and Head of Treasury and the Treasury team talking about the budget aligning policy. But we also have HLE Paulser and Minister Bradell in that budget policy because it lands, as you said, the coalface is at local government, it lands at local government. So they also sit in those meetings to identify. Then I think coming to your specific or more specifics in your question, identifying skills shortfalls, it's something that that local government, the local government department, I mean, I know it's a big issue. Right now, after this last election, local governments are looking for CFOs, they're looking for municipal managers, they're looking for skills, and they're battling to find those skills. It is a big, big issue. Maybe to go another level down, I've announced that we're going to be forming an infrastructure department. And it's interesting, even in those discussions, we're going to cabinet now, the next cabinet with a process. But I mean, TG was in a discussion with me just a short while ago, where this is another point that was brought up in, have we got the right skills? Because, you know, whether it's national government trying to deliver a dam at Clanwilliam, or if it's, you know, us trying to deliver on a hospital, or local government trying to deliver on a sewage system upgrade, do we have the right skills? And specifically in our rural municipalities, it is a big, big issue. So I absolutely agree with you, but these are the platforms where we identify these shortcomings. And then we put programs together to see how can we address it, not necessarily from this department though, but it's in our engagements then with the Department of Local Government, and then through these platforms with municipalities. And then maybe the last point, you know, obviously this enables investment, and you're absolutely right. And Westgrow and the team can't get investors to come to a town if the systems are not working and they haven't got the infrastructure in place or they're not upgrading properly. So it is obviously an issue, and we've got to close that circle. And right now it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, I think, specifically for smaller towns, because remote working is so easy. It's so easy for someone to pack up somewhere in another part of the world and just say, well, I'm going to go to Beaufort West because that's where I feel like I can go and work from. And the town doesn't actually have the ability to deal with not necessarily the big investor, even the small investor who's actually coming for 6 months. And it is putting pressure on the system. I absolutely agree with you. But that's where these processes identify those shortfalls. And then we've got to make sure that we enabling to fill those gaps. Jordan, if you want to add.
Premier, thanks. I mean, maybe I'm going to ask Mr. Jumat just to talk about the work that we're doing with local government. I mean, if you look at the department of the Premier, and particularly our 5-year strategic plan, you know, the 5th VIP, or our 5th priority, deals actually with integrated management, and part of that is the work that we're doing, particularly with local government as well as the Treasury. And in fact, many of the publications that we're bringing out, particularly if you think about the Municipal Economic Review and Outlook, if you look at some of our own policy documentation that we're doing, Premier spoke about the Premier's Coordinating Forum. We work with Minister Bradell with regards to his forums that he's got with mayors. And then also I, as the DG, engages with the municipal managers on an administrative level as it relates to many of these things. But Andre, if you can maybe just touch on what are 2 or 3 of the key initiatives where we interface with local government.
Thanks, DG. I think what the vision-inspired priority number 5 does is enact and give life to, as you had pointed out, the role of the department as enabler. So as enabler, we're supposed to put down the capacities, the capabilities, and we call it our toolbox, to put the tools and make the tools available. Some of them come in the form of an actual capability, like data, and others come in the form of programs. So specifically in VIP5, we have a couple of focus areas in which we interact with local government as a department, provincial department, and through them into municipalities as well. And the specific focus area is something that we call integrated service delivery, where our department, led by DLG, also with Provincial Treasury on board, are involved in the 3 core outcomes. One of those core outcomes of that focus area is, in fact, skills development. It's led by a particular chief director in the Department of Local Government. And so our addition to that requirement comes through the identification of skills. Now, those skills may not be at the professional level that the Premier has pointed out as what is, in fact, some of the real issues at the infrastructure level. And that then ties in another focus area in VIP5, a focus area related to talent and skills development, which brings into effect, again, one of our own capabilities, which is the Provincial Training Institute. And we have also a track record of working with local government, with municipalities. Our challenge with the Provincial Training Institute is to reconfigure it to be more responsive to these new requirements. So that's also an integrated whole in VIP5. What we've also been doing, and in this focus area, is where our Provincial Data Office, our Chief Director, the SMI, Ms. Ishmael is sitting there. We work together very closely with him in terms of data analysis, providing the data capabilities to understand what's the evidence, what are the sorts of data that comes out of those spaces, and how do we respond. Then also within VIP5, we have a focus area, an outcome that looks toward partnering and collaboration. Now that's the point that you asked about earlier. So how does one municipality in which there's particular strengths, in a sense, translate those or transfer those successes? And that's where partnering, collaboration is promoted. And that's a particular outcome where we also have a strong presence of the EDP in the VIP5, and where both departments, Premier and local government, work very closely with the EDP in promoting that. So those is the deployment of what we call our tool sets, our capabilities and capacities through VIP5 to start addressing some of these challenges. And just the last one, we have an interesting, if you want to call it, approach to tackling what we call wicked and really vicious problems. What we call problem-driven iterative adaptation approach to challenging or to addressing these challenges, the PDIA. And one of, in fact, of the new problem areas is, in fact, local economic development in municipalities, in which you will be applying the PDIA methodology with local governments in order to begin to address some of their own issues. And all of that lies within the capability stack that lives in the department.
Thank you very much. Member Brinkers, are you still on pages 1 to 11 to 10? You wanted to pose a question? Are you okay now? You covered. Okay. Yeah, I want to move on actually. Do you want to stand still from 1 to 10, or you ready to move on? I want to move on to from 11 to 20.
Chase, thanks. My understanding of your ruling is that we were focusing on the Premier's
forward and statement in the APP.
Page 1 to 10.
And then 1 to 10, yeah. Are you still on 1 to 10? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I would like to ask on some questions on 1 to 10 then, if I could do that.
Okay. I want to ask you again to please work with me, not a long haul. Please pose your questions.
I'm going to do exactly that. So in regard to pages 1 to 10, I wonder, Chair, could I just do them all quickly? They're just all questions. First one is on the mission on page 1. The question is, how does this mission reflect the state that this province, in fact, is not through mainly the city of Cape Town able to provide adequate services to the poor and the marginalized, and has actually underspent and rolled over budgets in critical departments such as education and human settlements, when you compare that to the mission of improved services for the people of the Western Cape. Then on page 3, under people management, where there's a reference there to seeks to enable service excellence, etc. Programs for within corporate services. The question is this the program responsible for the recruitment and training of provincial staff? And what is the purpose of the consultants that are referred to? And what particular services do those consultants provide? And could we have an indication as to whether the consultants referred to are former state employees, and what are the the HDI status of these consultants that the program for people management are using, and then under what terms are these consultants appointed? What is the contract duration of these consultants appointed on? And are these skills not transferable to the Western Cape government itself? And then the program corporate assurance on page 4, when one refers to corporate communication and so on, is there not a danger of overlapping with the Department of Health, particularly in regard to the communications around the pandemic? And is this not a duplication? And then on page 5, the Center for E-Innovation, the issue of CT operations and service management strategy and planning and ICT governance, as well as the broadband. I want to ask how much of this money referred to on page 5, the Blue Book, will be spent on actual infrastructure, and what is meant by the notion of aging infrastructure. How much is being spent specifically on broadband rollout, and how much of the broadband infrastructure is actually owned by the Western Cape government, or is that owned by Liquid Telecom or whoever? And then last, okay, page 9, demands and changes in services. The issue of provincial strategic management is a statement that has experienced increased demand for policy and technical support. The demand is expected to further increase in regard to priorities linked to the recovery plan, data-led evidence, and so on. So could we have examples of what data-driven policy has been implemented, the impact that it has had, and the costs associated with that data-driven policy, and how many consultants were actually employed to provide this input and at what cost? And then on page 10, people management again, the issue of the closer alignment with the Chief Directorate within the program for people management with regard to demand planning. What is the demand planning function specifically? Could we get just an explanation? Does demand planning function source consultants, or does it employ permanent staff? How many vacancies have not been filled that are being filled by contractors? And how does this affect the long-term departmental performance? And then the CEI in regard to broadband services expiring on the 30th of September 2024, with broadband firmly embedded in the Western Cape government, Cape Access Centres, etc. Now the question is, why are there no standalone sites for public access? The information that we have is that every site is linked to a government building. And our understanding always was that when we talk about community access to Wi-Fi, we're talking about sites located in the community, but it seems that every single Wi-Fi hotspot is attached to a government building. My question is there no attention in this year that we are talking about to actually install Wi-Fi? Even when we were in the West Coast, Chair, when we were trying to find out where the Wi-Fi hotspots were, they were all attached to a government building, which are not necessarily close to where the community is. So if someone at night, a young person is wanting to submit their CV or whatever the case may be, the issue is the Wi-Fi hotspots are not close to the community. And did the contract that was made between the provincial government and Liquid Telecom exclude actually setting up Wi-Fi hotspots within the community? And then finally on page 10, corporate services, how many forensic investigations were conducted? And then what were the outcomes of these investigations? And what actually prompted the investigations, and what specifically was being investigated? That's up to page 10 the Blue Book. Thanks.
That's the whole Blue Book, eh? Members on the virtual platform, any questions from your side? None? Member Dago, there was one long question that you asked, and I think it was the second one that you have posed. There was long attachments to it. I want to ask whether the department could not give that to us in writing. It was around the consultants, and then you had a whole range of questions around them. I didn't jot them down, but
Okay, I'm not sure which
there's
page you're
quite a
referring
few.
to.
That was page 2, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Chair, can I just suggest, and I don't
quite-
want to,
It's
I
quite a bit
respect
of
you chairing the
information
meeting,
that you have requested.
but can't we just see how they respond, and if they, you know, have difficulties, we
Okay.
could. Yeah.
Okay, then I would then say to the department, if you cannot respond here, then may I ask that you respond in writing hereafter. Okay, all right. Premier, DG?
Chair, did you note my hand?
No, I only see your hand now. When I asked, there was no hand. But
Oh,
please go
sorry.
ahead.
All right, thanks, Chair. Mine is on page 9. The department speaks about the vision-inspired priorities, and it also mentions the spatial planning development as one of the priorities of the department. Now, what I want to understand is that as far as spatial planning and development is concerned, what is the department's policy or plans regarding the private housing developments that are taking place in areas closer to economic opportunities? That what is the department doing to make sure that these private housing developments also cater for affordable social housing of the people of the Western Cape, in particular, not only targeting the metro, in all the towns in the Western Cape. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Member Kleho. Premier, DG?
Chair, I'll start and then hand over. I think I'll start first of all on the first question from Honourable Dugmore. I don't think that that's a fair question to say where in the mission are you going to find how local governments are not spending their budgets. I don't think that's a fair question. You know, the mission is to enable and lead a capable Western Cape government by institutionalizing a culture of innovation and collaboration to improve services. You know, say where in this culture is it the City of Cape Town not spending their budget on infrastructure or education? I don't think that's fair. I mean, you've got to give a broad vision. Those exact questions are why we're here, and those questions must be asked in those departments. If you're not spending your budget, you need to account for why you're not spending your budget. It can't be incorporated in here. But exactly that's what this process is about, and that's what opposition and how democracy works. So the honourable member, I mean, he must ask those exact questions in those exact department programs of where they are not spending their budget, why they are not spending a budget, and what are their plans are to spend that budget. Then I think I'll, before I hand over, I actually want to say to the Honourable Kleho that on his question, you will see straight away that and when you get to a meeting with the Department of Planning and Environmental Affairs, you can actually ask them about the social housing policy. It is now completed and being embedded, and that it does exactly what he's talking about. It talks about any development and what kind of component of that development has a social housing component to it. And then on the other side of it is not necessarily in the spatial planning, but also in the activities of this government. And so whether it is the Conradi Park, and I'm not sure if the Standing Committee has visited there or if he has visited there, but he should go and visit, because I think that is how we are changing policy and enabling different thinking on social housing incorporated into housing developments. And of course, now our big task is how do we actually get private sector to be delivering similar projects? How do we really get not just one of these projects, how do we get 20 or 30 of them? And then he's just in the last part of his question about specifically in CBDs, etc. I mean, he should actually ask the question of the plan for the Helen Bowden development of exactly the same way that Conradie's been developed. But the problem is the Helen Bowden development is now held captive by illegal invasion. And now where you want to deliver thousands of opportunities, you're now held captive. And in actual fact, in order to deal with that, it's going to cost millions and millions of rands to actually find alternate accommodation so that you can actually start that project. It's being held up now for years, and really is unacceptable that that illegal activity can actually hold up development programs that enable opportunities for housing for citizens in the specific areas that he's actually talking about. It would be nice to see him actually supporting the enablement of that specific project so that we could actually move people off site and actually start the development of that project. Chair, I'm going to hand over to DG because obviously a lot of these questions relate to actual or even the wording around consultants. I think there's a bit of confusion there.
Thank you very much. And I mean, I'm going to ask the program managers also to come in, but maybe just 1 or 2 points on some of the key stuff. On the broadband, I mean, Milton can talk about it, but I mean, the current contract expires in October 2024. What I can say to the committee is that, I mean, we've already started work, particularly the thinking on broadband 2.0, as we call it. And I would actually welcome the opportunity to make a presentation to this committee on broadband itself. So what's been achieved, where's it been rolled out? And in fact, we're upping our game. This year in October, many of our sites at schools will run up to 1 gig per second. I mean, if you look at what's happening in some of the other places, people are struggling to connect sites that run up to 10 megs per second, and only in a small number up to 100. I mean, we almost and in fact, some of our sites are already running at 1 gig per second, but from October, we will really up our game on that. But Chair, I would actually welcome rather a presentation, but Hilton can also talk to the detail. I mean, we've taken a particular decision 10 years ago. I mean, reflecting in hindsight, it's probably been the best decision not to procure any of the infrastructure, because obviously things move, things change, and we wanted to leave it in the hands of the professionals, people that actually invest heavily in R&D, you know, that look at best practices across the world, and we just reap the benefit from that. So we bought a service. I mean, that service is contracted obviously via CETA, and we've seen many advantages of going that particular route. And in fact, CETA is using our model, you know, to obviously roll out broadband in the broader KZN, even parts of Gauteng, and now particularly within the Eastern Cape, because obviously they've partnered with us to make this a success. And as I've indicated previously, we're looking, you know, at the mechanism. How much was spent on it? I mean, we can easily provide that, but as I said, I think the best thing is really to provide you with a full-on presentation. On the issue of consultants, contractors, etc., particularly within the Program 3 environment, I mean, many of that's actually our own people. I think it's more terminology, but I will get Andre or Louise to actually respond to that. A lot of our services, particularly within Program 3 under the people management environment, is demand driven, because we take responsibility through our CSE model for the HR in all departments, except obviously the Department of Education and Health. Although we get together, I mean, there's a committee, so they're not out of sync with what we're doing in the center, and we're not out of sync with what they are doing. And Louise, being the head of people management, is actively engaging, and the relationships between ourselves and those two departments are excellent, so that we push one broad agenda. Then just lastly, on the issues of potential overlap in the communications environment, I can assure you that there's no overlap between ourselves and health, particularly around COVID. You can see the messaging that's been produced, you know, under the guidance of the Premier, because I mean, the Premier was chairing all those, actually is chairing all the cabinets where we talk about COVID. Our government response is 100% aligned. In fact, they're making use of the corporate space to develop many of their things, but some of the communication is obviously health directly related. and but there's good working relationship. In fact, our comms team, they meet with the broader comms team in the entire province, at least on a weekly basis. In the COVID space, close relationship, so you wouldn't see mixed messaging, particularly on COVID. So it's on branding, we're on target, we know where we're going. We've developed the hotspot strategy, so we were aware all the time as to where some of these kind of bushfires happen. We went into targeted approaches, even with regards to the research work. Every week at Cabinet, we've actually presented key research around the COVID space, obviously with a very strong joint comms team, behind the entire strategy. So therefore, Chair, I mean, if you listen to a lot of the radio campaigns, even our print media, you could see proper alignment in all of the areas. I'm going to ask Hilton maybe to start. Then, I mean, Henriette, if you just want to talk about some of the forensic stuff, again, we can provide you with those stats, if it's needed. Obviously, we do not want to go into the detail, again, Chair, like what we've done with the stuff in terms of the ICT stuff, because obviously some of those investigations are still ongoing. And I mean, there's regular reporting to the respective accounting officers on them. And then Hildegard, if you can just touch on the whole issue around, well, maybe Premier has already spoken about the spatial planning matters, particularly around Conradi, so I don't think there's a need for that. But let me ask Hilton first to speak. And then Andre, between you and Louise, if you can maybe just touch on the issue around what's happening in your particular program, particularly on page 3. Hilton?
Thanks, DG. Your first question on what was spent on what is spent on infrastructure. When you go to page 32, you'll see there's a table that speaks to the economic classification of our expenditure, and our machinery and equipment budget is 36.8 million. That's on page 32. So I think 5 million of that relates.
Sorry, can I just ask you to speak in the mic? Sure. You're not quite very audible. You can't
Thanks
hear
so
you.
much. Is that better, Chairperson? Thanks. I'll start again. So, remember, Dagmo, your first question related to how much is spent on infrastructure. If you go to page 32, on the table on the economic classification, that's table 9.4.1. There we have an amount of 36.8 million that relates to machinery and equipment, and that's predominantly our infrastructure spend. And you also ask, what is aging infrastructure? We have an analysis of all our infrastructure items, and it's predominantly routers, switches, and servers, and also our UPSs, the uninterruptible power supply that we need to replace. And at this stage, we're replacing items that's 7 to 9 years old. So we've already sweated those assets, and we now need to replace it because it also poses security risk. So those are the infrastructure items. How much is spent on broadband? Once again, page 32. There's the earmark allocation for broadband, and the amount that's been listed there is 476 million. And also the subsequent years are listed there. And broadband is predominantly a service, as the DG said. We do not own the infrastructure, and it is a best practice model that's been adopted nationally now in terms of rolling out broadband across the country. And I think SA Connect is also adopting that process. DG, we just received a report from Mr. Williams, my predecessor, where he said that their standard is 5 megabits per second in terms of broadband. Our minimum speed is 10 megs per second for all our sites. So when we look at our stats at the moment, of our 1,911 sites that we have in the province, only 395 are still on 10 megs per second, and we're moving that to 100 megs per second by the end of September this year, or the 1st of October. And that links to your next question, Member Dagmo. Why are there no standalone sites? The reason why there are no standalone sites is because we did not procure connectivity to standalone sites. The intention of the broadband project was to make sure that we have broadband in our government sites, and only the sites that have 100 megs and more bandwidth, only those sites we install Wi-Fi hotspots. And the challenge that we have also, the distance from the building to where we can place hotspot is a maximum of 80 meters, and that's why it's always at the perimeter of a facility. And that is why we have, if we wanted to have specific sites within the communities, and we assume, not to assume, the general view is that these sites, the clinics, the hospitals, the schools, those are in the communities predominantly. And that's what we look at. We also try to place those Wi-Fi hotspot the signal at a space that points to the communities, the local community. There have been some concerns about where it's placed, but that gives us an opportunity in the new broadband contract to look at how do we make the service available further or deeper in the communities. So we need to acknowledge the first part of broadband 1.0 was to connect our sites to broadband. The second phase will be focusing on the services and the requirements of our provincial, our government departments and municipalities and also our citizens. So that's where the intervention that DG spoke about in terms of our business requirements for broadband 2.0 is now coming to the fore in terms of what were the blind spots in the first one and how do we improve on the current service that we have in the new contract. Thanks, Chairperson.
Andre and then Louise.
DG, thanks, Chair. I want to respond to the question on consultants in PMP. I think it's possibly that sentence that refers to a consultancy service, I think reflects on the nature of the work that we do in people management practices. It ranges from highly transactional stuff, you know, the rote sort of leave form, processing, those all sorts of applications and so on, to where in fact we also do higher level work for our client departments, which we refer to as a consultancy service. And I think it's best if I describe it possibly with 3 examples. So whilst departments they have a very limited HR capability in their departments. We would work for them and with them to provide, as a specific example, the development of their own departmental COE plan, COE management plan. So there's a transversal provincial policy, and we then help them to, within those policy parameters, develop their own, because that's the principle of the provincial policy. It is going to be bespoke. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. And so we provide that consultancy service. A second type of service is where Nell's team will go in and help them develop their own culture program, citizen-centric culture, departmental culture program, in consultants, in co-creating that with them. And that's the sort of consultancy service that we provide internally. We have, I think, quite a sophisticated people analytics and data analytics capability. And our team will then go and sit with departments, for example, in the development of the COE plan, or having to make recruitment decisions and point out recruitment trends, data trends, turnaround times, and also the exits, age analysis, and those sorts of things. That's what we provide, other than just the normal transactional stuff. So that's, sorry, what we refer to as consultancy. There's no procuring of an external. Yeah. Thanks.
Chair, just want to check, Louise, you wanted to add anything?
That's correct. And even when we get to the demand planning is done by our workforce planning team. So they go to the departments and determine the needs for services in the following year. And then how do we respond to the needs of the clients? And that's what we mean with demand planning.
Chair, there's only 2 questions remaining. One on by member, 2 actually by member Dagmo. I just want to check quickly on page 9. There was a question on the data-driven policies. Zenit, will you respond to that?
Thank you, Minister Dagmo. In terms of the question, in terms of the...
Just put on your mic and just closer to the mic.
In terms of the question, in terms of the question for demand for services, especially related to the data and evidence, and I'm going to go quickly back to the lessons that we learned during COVID and taking that through. The Provincial Data Office and the Department of the Premier worked in collaboration with departments. The demand for services was in particularly for understanding the landscape of the data and also the improving the quality of the data, putting standards in place, the patient data records, and locating patients, working with the Department of Health, examples of the data, and then actually also giving more insights into data. But more so, also about enable data sharing. And we have actually worked with the demand for sharing data and the appetite for sharing data, that awareness is actually driving now a demand for a culture for data. And so the demand is expanded even interdepartmentally even across organizations, but also inter in the departments. There are a number of examples, especially in terms of data sharing. We've now got memorandum of collaborations with all Western Cape government departments. We have, coming from COVID, we have the memorandum of agreement with the city. And we also have, with a few municipalities now, working with legal services also to actually have that memorandum of agreements. So all data sharing is facilitated, taking all data security into account, data standards into account, and we have data sharing agreement. Very much now we have progressed, and because of that in advancement, we've really, the demand for services have also increased. Our work with Department of Health now recently was a mental health steering committee, and so there's a number of examples even in education. And finally, I can say it is data on its own, but also bringing data and technology closer together. So that value chain, the demand for that value chain has also been increased. So across Western Cape government, there are data champions working together also with those in the the IT champions in the department. And one thing that we have achieved through the demand for services is a provincial data forum in the Western Cape government. Thank you.
I mean, maybe just to add, I mean, we've taken a deliberate decision in this government, particularly over the last 2 years, to center our key decisions around data. Everything must be data-led. So I think the best examples that I can refer the committee to, if you go to our website, I mean, I'm sure you know our address, just go and check the Western Cape data portal. I mean, in addition to that, we also have portals for staff, but the portal that's been accessed by the public. So everything we did around COVID is based on data, information, and Zenith's team, together obviously with the Department of Health, is a team that sits behind it. We're taking it a bit further, obviously within the socioeconomic environment. We've also assisted municipalities. We've given them access to some of these data points. What we're doing now is we're trying to get information even on a lower level than just saying a municipality or a town. We want to also know what is going on in the street, what is going on, you know, at a particular school. And in fact, today we had a safety manco where we've actually looked at some of the successes just around using data to deploy, let's call it, you know, police or even, you know, the LEAP officers, etc. And what is the power of data in terms of the services that we can deliver as government. So in this space, I can assure you, you're still going to see more.
Thank you, DG. Member Dartmouth, through you, Chairperson, we have conducted, as at the end of Feb, 29 investigations. In terms of the outcomes and where the whistleblowing, how it was reported, I think we must submit a detailed report. I don't have the information on me.
I think that takes care of all the questions by the two members. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, did you want to follow up? No, I'm asking first. I'm asking. Okay, then your 3 questions is going to wait until we get back. We're going to break now. And then, yes, but your 3 questions is going to take over 3:45 to be responded to. So we're going to break now, and then we're going to come back at 4 promptly, and then we will start.
I think in terms of the answer on the, I think that would be for me, the response I understood was 29. I would request that we just get, obviously we can't have all the detail of
the case, yeah.
The basic question I asked was in regard to what were the issues investigated, what were the outcomes, were there any so a summary of those 29, if I've got it, for the committee in writing.
In writing, yes, that I agree with you. So department members, we're going to break now, and we will come back promptly starting at 4 o'clock. Thank you. There is tea and coffee in the members' lounge for everybody. Those that are on the virtual platform, you may go and make yourself a cup of tea or coffee. 11 and to 20, and you may correlate your questions with questions that you have in the APP. Okay. Member Dagmo, I'll note you. Anybody online? None?
Chair, I
So,
think,
Member Dagmo, I'm from 11 to 20.
Chair, you remember before you declared the tea break, I said I had the last 3 questions on.
Okay, so
1 to 10.
quickly with your last 3 questions.
Okay. Last 3 questions. Chair, on page 3, or firstly on page 2, there's reference to providing an enabling workplace. And then in terms of people management, my question goes about policy consistency in regard to people management. And it's a very specific issue that I'd like to ask. And I think the Premier and the DG are aware of this because I have asked the question previously. But firstly, I would like to ask, what is the policy in regard to an official of the provincial government who is facing criminal charges in a court of law? What does the people management policy say? What does the provincial say about that situation? Is there a policy or not? Secondly, in regard to the particular issue that I'm referring to, which people are aware is in the Department of Transport and Public Works, did the Office of the Premier or People's Management conduct their own investigation into that matter? And if so, could that information on a confidential basis be provided to the committee? And then lastly, in regard to on page 6, sorry, I'll just, because I've only got one more page, 8, when we refer to the framework on gender responsive planning, budgeting, monitoring and evaluation. I would like to ask the Premier, do we have a single policy in the government that deals with the combating of GBV and sexual harassment within the provincial government? Is there a policy? If there is a policy, can we have a copy of it? And if there isn't a policy, if you could indicate what is the process towards getting such a policy? Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was questions that stood over. Before our tea break, I'm on pages 11 to 21. Members, any questions there? Member Maseko?
Thank you very much, Chair. I think maybe to align my question to what Member Dagmo asked about the sexual harassment policy, is just to ask the department, if they do have that policy, how do they align that to the labor one? Because I tend to believe that for the employment, you have the policy that has to do with the sexual harassment from the labor side. So how do you align that? And to the one, if you have the new one that has to do with the department of the Premier only. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Member Allen, I note you.
Thank you so much, Chair. You did mention we are on pages 11 to 20 as well.
You're correct.
Thank you so much. Chairperson, I noted prior to the break, we spoke about data, or we listened to input regarding data, and I wanted to tie it to page 11, the Provincial Data Office. I do know that the Premier as well as the DJ often speak about evidence-based and being data-led. I just wanted to triple check regarding the interventions that have been devised by the Provincial Data Office regarding certain communities and the area profiles. Would that data be for public consumption or for the consumption of members as well? I think those community indicators that provide the government a understanding of that particular community is obviously vital and important in tying it to data and to evidence led in our approaches. So that is the one, and I wanted to to also latch on that the establishment of that provincial data office, how many staff would that have? Is that fully capacitated? And the um, quarterly and every 3 months when there's a report out again, is that for members to consume and to look at as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the DG, the time, the time to talk series, if you could talk to that also, please. Members, I am done from pages 11 to 20. Do I note you? 2. Yes. Okay.
Okay, 11 to 20.
11 to 20.
Yeah, I'd like to ask on page 13, once again, it's a follow-up on the Wi-Fi, but it's a new question, Wi-Fi access. Could I just ask, you've explained through the chair, the issue of looking at the next round and the issue of like community-centered sites as opposed to government sites in a community. What I would like to ask right now as we speak, what are the operating hours of the hotspots, given that they are in government buildings? So, for instance, let's take Feltra, for example. If the clinic there closes at 4:30 and it's a Wi-Fi hotspot place, does that mean that no member of the public can go there at 5 o'clock and get access to that, what is referred to as a public Wi-Fi hotspot? And then I just want to ask, in regard to the current agreement with Neotel, of this whole 1.2 billion, that's in this budget, what amounts are we going to pay to Liquid Telecom or whatever it's called now? What are we going to pay them this year? Because my understanding, and maybe it's a very basic understanding, at some level we're paying them to put in the infrastructure. Now I want to know, what are we paying them this year? Are we paying them anything? Is it a rental or is it new infrastructure? So in this budget, can you explain what are we paying to the successor of Neotel, if it's Liquid Telecom, and what are we paying to the SITA, the SITA, in terms of the budget that we have? And what does that buy? If we are paying them something, what does that buy? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Keeping in mind, Member Doug, that there was also a proposal that we'll get a standalone presentation on broadband on its own. Okay. Member Allen, I note that your hand is still raised. Okay. Premier, DG, that's the round. Members, that's the round for pages 11 to 20. Thank you.
Chair, I would suggest, I mean, there's been a letter on this by Member Dugmore, the issue, that we are currently dealing with. So, I mean, we can probably respond to that letter. I mean, we've got responses that we're putting together already on the matter in the Department of Transport and Public Works. I'd rather prefer that we respond to it in the way that it came, so that we can also just check with the relevant department.
Sure,
so we can deal with that. So it's an issue around the policy consistency, the issue around our policy on criminal charges, and then also the issue around obviously independence and stuff like that, and then also on the issue of a single policy on combating GBV and harassment. I mean, that's all part of our own departmental policies. That's in place. We have given a commitment, a public commitment, that we will review it. Obviously, we want to take some lessons learned, from it, and also even consult outside institutions, and NGOs on it. That's already, I think, institutionalized best practices to make sure that our policies are world-class, it's best practice, and that we become responsive. Obviously, with stuff like this, Chair, you always learn, as you go along. But the thing is that we can't do nothing about it. So we are in the process of reviewing that policy, and Louise is here. And I think once the policy has been reviewed and properly consulted with the unions, heads of departments and stuff like that, we will then also take it to cabinet and then deal with it accordingly. So I think that then also deals with the question by Member Masego. On the issues around the data office and the area profiles, I mean, we do present some information on a quarterly basis, to this committee. I mean, according to me, none of those meetings were closed, so it is actually also available to the public. But what we want to do with regards to the broader data governance, so Chair, if you go back, the first 2 years of establishing the data office was to make sure that the governance arrangements are in place. Obviously, given the POPI requirements, et cetera, and to making sure that we're not making people's information available without them actually knowing. But what we also want to do is the more information you put in the public domain, the more you can get the public to also engage with it, so that communities can also know what's going on in their space, what is it that they can do to make things better. So I'd rather go for more of an open proposal to give the communities the data and stuff that we've got, so that they can also make their own analysis. But obviously, we need to make sure that we stay within the realm of the respective legislation. So on the public profiles, access, and all those things, if it doesn't impact on people individually, I mean, I don't think we would have any issue with regards to that. I mean, Zenith, you can probably talk to staff. I mean, from where I'm sitting, I don't think the entire unit is capacitated, but we don't also just want to flood the unit with people. I mean, that's not the idea. It's something new that we've started, and we want to actually build it and build it with departments. So we've got data analysts there. We've got people that understands what's happening in the economy. We've got people from the social environment. And what we do is we continuously feed back to the respective departments. And then obviously we also have the constraints, around even our staff capacity. Hilton, if you can maybe just talk to the issues of the operating hours of the hotspots. I mean, the payments to CETA, if you have those amounts, we can share that, because I mean that's also public information. And then obviously what goes to CETA, what goes to Liquid, keeping in mind that obviously Liquid is contracted to CETA, and we're basically paying for the service. So whether it's to connect our public Wi-Fi spots or to connect, our some of our sites that links the government building, and those services are contractually bound. So it's in the number of sites times X amount, and it's in terms of the 10-year agreement, and all the processes are in place to obviously check before we make any of those payments. So Hilton, if you can just respond to that, and then, but before you do that, let me maybe just deal with this whole issue around time to talk. Chair, you probably pick that up as part of what we want to do under culture. I mean, in this department, we're going to drive this year the issue of culture and also the issue of values very, very hard. I mean, last year we started with the issue around innovation. Innovation for us is part of our culture, but then there's a deeper thing that deals with the values. So culture is really whether we are living those values that we've agreed to. So one of the cultural shifts that we want to make is to actually listen more as public officials, okay? Because sometimes we want to almost think for the broader public out there. So part of the idea, and you will see it, it's new. In each of the programs, you will see there are service delivery visits where we're committing to go out each program, one site visit per quarter, just to go out, whether you go to a Karl Bremer, whether you go to a hospital, whether you go into community, and just observe. Just go out there, listen to what people are saying. You come back to the office and we say, how can we improve it? And you can just imagine if you have 6 programs, 6 initiatives per quarter, 24 for the year, and if we can get that same thing to be implemented in the rest of government, I mean, it will make a massive difference. So it links to Bartopele about being citizen-centric, responsive, but we want to listen more, and then obviously go back, to communities. Listen more, time to listen, and less talking by officials. Hilton, if you can maybe just deal, with your issue around the Wi-Fi access, and I think I've responded to the other issues. Thanks.
Thanks, Chairperson, DG. So the operating hours of these Wi-Fi hotspot is it's the 24-hour sites availability. However, when we do receive complaints from citizens, for example, the hotspot is close to a person's house or one or two people's homes, where they complain that the people are rowdy at night and they say that till 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or they create a security risk, then we do switch off those specific hotspots at 5 o'clock in the evening or 6 o'clock, depending on what's appropriate. We do not switch it off completely, or we try to direct that specific signal into a different area where they do not impose on the people, because sometimes it's old people and they have all these youngsters congregating outside of their homes, sitting on their fences. And if they have problems with those people, then they get threatened. So that's why we need to switch it off for the securities. But in general, even though the hospital or the clinic closes, doesn't mean that the Wi-Fi hotspot is now switched off. It's generally operational 24/7. In terms of what we're paying to Liquid Telecom, in the agreement we have specific installation costs and then also a monthly fee that we pay Liquid Telecom depending on the bandwidth. So if it's a 10 meg, 100 meg, or 1 gig line, we will pay a different rate depending on the type of line that we have in that specific facility. And for the Wi-Fi hotspots, there's a standard rate for the Wi-Fi hotspots, because the Wi-Fi hotspot, as I said, is a spin-off of the 100 meg line, and we assign 10% of that 100 meg line to public Wi-Fi. We can provide you with the rates, the exact rates for each one of these type of services. I do have it here, but I think we'll provide it in writing in terms of what's the rates for each one of these, the type of facilities that we have.
Sorry, Chair. Just a quick follow-up.
If that's the round, yes, then you may follow up.
I would just like to know, in the budget, I understand that there are variations, but what have you budgeted for as the likely payment that you might have to make to, who is the actual successor? Is it Liquid Telecom? Is that who we're dealing with now?
Yeah, Liquid Telecom.
So in our budget, how much are we allocating for that? Like you mentioned, monthly amounts and yearly amounts. So what is the allocation? What are you expecting to pay?
In total?
Yeah.
Okay, so in total that we'll be paying to the, sorry, I've got the amount for the broadband in total, and I haven't got it split up for Liquid and CETA specifically, but we will provide that. And as I said, it's 476 million for broadband total. For Wi-Fi hotspots specifically, that goes directly to Liquid, because I think that's what you wanted to know. In terms of the Wi-Fi hotspots, that's 31 million for this year. And also on page 32, it's a separate line item and it shows you. So it works at about 2,000 Rand per hotspot that we pay.
Yeah, those things are, it's on page 32. I mean, those amounts have been earmarked, so we can't do anything with it except to pay for the service. So if member Dagmore, look on page 32, more or less in the middle of the page, those amounts are there. Page 32, yes.
Thank you very much. Member Marie, I note your hand. You're posing a question between pages 11 and 20.
Well, I just want to add on to what I've heard so far. I was a very keen listener. En ek het nog, tot dusver het ek net Engelsman nou gepraat en het lyk my, dit is, niemand hier kan Afrikaans praat nie. Almal praat Engels, ek is nie beïndruk nie. Ek wil net weet, as julle met die publiek skakel in die Weskaap, praat julle ook net Engels? Of is daar soms wanneer julle die mense adviseer en inligting gee in Afrikaans ook, of is julle nou almal vir Engels? Kan ek net bietjie duidelikheid kry wanneer julle praat van culture and values, en een van die groot dinge in kultuur is taal. Nou, kan julle Afrikaans praat, of wil julle nie Afrikaans praat nie? Ek moet net vir die departement die vraag vra.
Teegeer, wil u waag om dit te antwoord?
Voorsitter, ek sal definitief dit antwoord. Ek sal probeer in Afrikaans praat, want dit is ook my moedertaal. Member Marie, dat ons kontaksentrum, okay, die nommer wat die publiek kan bel, vir ons kontaksentrum, ons is ten volle drietalig. Ook in ons korrespondensie is, if ons in Afrikaans skryf, antwoord ons jou nie in Engels nie. As jy in Engels skryf, antwoord ons jou nie in Afrikaans nie. En jy sal self sien, ons boeke, ons maak gewoonlik 'n punt daarvan om te sê dat ons onderskraap die drietaal beleid van die provinsie. En as jy die dokumente in 'n ander taal wil hê, dan kan jy versoek en dan sal ons moeite maak om dit te doen. Ons het 'n volledige vertalingsdiens binne die departement van sport en kultuur wat ons gebruik en selfs ons pamflette, weet wat ons druk. As jy byvoorbeeld na 'n gebied toe gaan waar dit grootendeels Afrikaans is, dan sal jy sien daai pamflette is in Afrikaans by hospitale of by skole. Grootendeels Engels is in Engels en as daar grootendeels Xhosa is, sal dit ook in Xhosa wees of ook Xhosa in Engels of Afrikaans in Engels. So ons onderskrap 'n volledige drietalige beleid in die provinsie.
Lid Marie, dit is nou 'n antwoord in goeie Afrikaans.
Wel, ek is so bly dat ek kon 'n slag slaan vir Afrikaans. Ek dink die publiek wat luister sal ook kennis neem.
Baie dankie Lid Marie. Ons gaan voort. Ek is nou vanaf bladsy 21 tot 30. Enige vrae, Lid Marie?
Ek gee altyd die geleentheid eerste vir die leier van die oppositie. Ek dink hy is die eerste ou wat altyd praat, ons volg maar net. Hy het mos die meeste stemme daar in die huis.
Onthou, u is ook 'n leier van die eie party.
Ja, nee, ek het nie nou 'n vraag nie. Ek sal maar aanlas, hoor.
Member Dagmo. Any questions? Member Maseko?
Okay, yeah. Thanks, Chair. Just if I can just go back to the APP quickly, page 18.
Yes.
I see there on page 18, there's a specific reference in regard to particular priorities and so on, and also the legislation which guides the department. I notice also that there is no particular, obviously the constitution of the province and nationally are the guiding documents, but I notice that nowhere in the budget is there any allocation for the environmental commissioner. So what I would like to ask, Chair, through you to the Premier, is this financial year runs until March next year. I think all of us know that we are in the process of concluding the public hearings, but is the fact that there is no allocation for the environmental commissioner, what is the reason for that? Because clearly there would, from my point of view, be seed funding necessary, given, of course, Chair, as you know, that the overwhelming majority of people that we consulted supported retaining the environmental commissioner. So if the Premier could comment on that, and then possibly also just to link to to go back now to page 21 of the Blue Book, that you will see there that there's a note under the summary of table 8.1. There's a reference there to the salary of the Premier, and then there's a note which says the budget structure of this department deviates from the national sectoral generic structure due to a modernization process whereby the organogram was revised and the program structure was brought in line with the organizational department. So could we have an explanation of that? But could we also ask the Premier in regard to executive governance and administration, if we could also then, which is referred to specifically on page 24, but it's linked to that. The Office of the Premier has 18 million specifically attached. What I would like to ask is if the Premier could take us into confidence in regard to what's been reported in the media about his intended replacement for his special advisor, Mr. Grant. If you could indicate to us at what level Mr. Grant was appointed, and if you could indicate to us in terms of his communication with the Minister or the Department of Public Administration, at what level does he intend to appoint former MEC permanent? And in terms of that specific amount of 18 million for the Office of the Premier, could indicate to us how much of that is for salaries. And then if he could, maybe that would be a written issue, just give us a breakdown of the total staff complement, who's permanent, who's contract, the levels of payment in the department, in the office of the Premier. Thanks.
Okay, and that covers your questions from pages 21 to 30. That covers your questions from 21 to 30. Please complete. Please complete. Please complete.
Okay, I would like to ask if, in terms of the earmarked allocations, page 27, the innovative initiatives of 13 million in this year, and obviously there's a bit more in the outer years, and then particularly on the Commissioner for Children, I note that, and I'm dealing with table 9.2 in the earmark, there's 10 for this year, and then it drops right down to 7 in the next year, and and it's like 7 again in the outer year. Can that drop be explained? And what I would also like to ask, there has been a view that as a Chapter 9 institution, because even in our provincial constitution, that there's in Chapter 9 is a reference to the Children's Commissioner. Now, that essentially, as per the national Chapter 9 institutions, it's a separate, independent, it's an independent institution, right? But now we are counting and allocating money from the Department of the Premier. So what I would like to ask the Premier and the DG is, what is the thinking and how would one give effect to the fact that the Children's Commissioner is an independent structure? What are the mechanisms which could give effect to that, so that in fact that becomes a vote, that they actually receive a certain amount and it's not part of the Premier's allocation? Because I think to achieve the independence that that office requires, it needs to be separate. So what is the thinking, and why has there been that? Why is there that reduction in the outer years? Yeah, that's up to page 30. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Member Maseko.
Okay, I'm covered. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Member Allen.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. I am partly covered as well in terms of page 27 regarding innovative initiatives. I attempted through you, Speaker, to the through you, Chair, to the DG. I tried to link it to the APP as well and just found one reference to the actual wording of innovative initiatives. Even though innovative appears a number of times, it would be interesting to hear what those initiatives would entail for that particular point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG Premier. That's the round for that pages.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start and then hand over to the DG. I think the first question around budgeting for the Environmental Commissioner, obviously it wouldn't be in this budget anyway, but we follow, without that regulation or legislation in place, then we could not or would not be able to put a budget in place or even have an indicative line. Just as was in the time when the Honourable Member was in government, he would have remembered that during that time when the ANC was sitting on this side of the room and I was sitting on that side of the room, probably asking exactly the same question, it was not a budget line item then either, because it can only become so once there's a regulation or a legislation piece in place that enables it. So, of course, any of these constitutional positions, or even when you write a new piece of legislation putting an entity in place, only once that's approved and passed would you then start to put your budgets in place. So obviously, and as you referred to, the Standing Committee is busy with this, and of course only at the end of that process would there then be any indication through to Treasury whether there should be any budget if any is required. Then under item, the second question, I think the first part around salaries for special advisor, the member is correct that when you put a special advisor in place, you first have to get DPSA approval for the salary level. And of course, I think he's actually talking about the indication that possibly Bongi Kosi Madikizela could be someone taking up that post. I think as he knows and as I've communicated before, we've sent that documentation through to DPSA. Once with the information that coming back would determine the level, and then only once that level, then I would decide to say, okay, what is the level salary within the framework that comes back from DPSA, and only then would I then meet the incumbent and say, this is something that we could offer you. There would be a contract on offer, and we're not even there at the moment yet. We've still got to then do that, determine that level, and what salary would be on offer for that position. Then, with regards to the other positions held, of course, all of our positions in our offices are determined by the handbook. There's a national handbook, but we also have a provincial handbook. And so we determine our offices and the makeup of our offices from the provincial handbook. So we're very happy. We'll supply you that detail in writing as to who those positions are. And then, of course, within the Premier's office, what the other posts are, and if there's any other determination on whether they're permanent employees or contract employees. Of course, the handbook staff that get appointed as per normal, with whose term of office is linked to the incumbent. So, of course, if I relinquished my position, their positions would also then come to an end. But we will definitely supply that to you in writing. I think the Children's Commissioner, I think I'll let the DG, obviously the initial cost is setup cost, and then once the office is set up, that's why you'll see a reduction, but I'll let the DG take those further.
Premier, thanks for that. I mean, on the Commissioner for Children, I mean, Member Dartmoor may recall that in the initial allocation happened last year, actually a year and a half ago, there was a provision for acquiring their own building, because obviously their requirements are different to that of government. And the Children Commissioner wanted to also get a building that is child friendly. I mean, that's really the gist. So when children come and they engage with the Commissioner, they can get into an environment, that actually speaks to them as individuals. We are at an advanced stage of procuring a building. In fact, they're using a current building. They want to use a current building of government, but the Department of Transport and Public Works is struggling to actually get the current tenants out of it, given some of the regulatory issues. So they have identified the building. That's what I'm saying. We're at an advanced stage, and I think we've allowed 3 million rand for that. So it's really just 3 million that's been rolled over from one year to the other year. So the 10.4 million includes a 3 million. I mean, if you deduct that, you can see then, Chair, that it's around 7 million or so. Maybe just on the Children's Commissioner, there has been money that's been added to capacitate her office. On her independence, I think that's something that Parliament must deal with. I mean, from where we're sitting, we understand and we respect the independence of the Children's Commissioner as far as it relates to direct reporting and accountability to Parliament. For now, they are, they're sitting in our vote. And really, from an accounting officer perspective, I really only have financial oversight over that office at the moment. But there's excellent relationships between myself and the Children's Commissioner. So for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, there's really been no issue. And the last point, Chair, is also noting that the people employed by the Children's Commissioner office are all public servants. It's only the Children's Commissioner that is an independent appointee reporting directly to Cabinet. So it's fairly easy, even to use government staff to actually help. And that is actually what has happened over the last year and a half. I know she has raised it in the sessions that we had with Parliament around, the Office of the Children's Commission, but I think that's something that one needs to deal with over time. And I think she's also accepted that that will be the practice, at least, until there's a different determination by Parliament. Then, Chair, on the issue of the staff, I mean, I agree with Premier. We will provide you with a written response. We can tell exactly how many people sits in that particular office. And then I think the question from member Allen was around, again, the I think the data stuff and what sits under innovative solutions. So if you go to page 24 of our APP. I think it actually sets it out very, very nicely. So the 13 million or so, and I mean, that's only in program 2. There's a little bit, I think, in program 3 also, deals in the main with 3, 4, 5 matters. Firstly, there's money that's been set aside to drive PDA. I mean, Mr. Jumat spoke about PDA being a step-by-step approach which break down problems and obviously look at the root causes and where we want to find common solutions. Then there's the work under VIP5, under particularly integrated service delivery. Then there's an additional expenditure on the work that Zinat Ismail is doing, particularly around under data, innovative ways to deal with data analytics, etc. And then in the governance transformation space, there's also work that we're doing, particularly developing a theory of change, and then transversal foresight, the capacity that we want to build. And then a major initiative, Chair, that we want to focus on starting this year is on talent and staff development. So we're looking at re-engineering, refurbishing, refreshing what we're doing at Cromaria, being our training institute. And we're really thinking about, changing that place to actually become a place of learning where we can actually build the capacity of the state. And all of that falls in, this bracket or this package called innovative initiatives across government. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Member Marie, I note your hand. On which page is your question?
Well, March, actually page 28, program 3, people management. I'm just eager to hear whether we are promoting internal promotions, or do our people have to wait for dead man's shoes, those who's been working in the department, say 10 or 12 or 15 years? What are their chances of promotion to higher levels, or does all new positions created are always advertised externally? And we lose such a lot of goodwill from the people who's been working here diligently for us, maybe for a number of years in a departments. So I would just like to hear the DG and the Premier's views on it, whether they would give preferential treatment and training for an assistant director to become a director, or a director to become a chief director, etc., etc. Or do we always advertise these posts, and the others who's there sitting as an assistant director or deputy director stay there till he dies one day or till he retires? I would just like to get clarity on that, on your people management style. Thank you.
Thank you, and you articulate in perfect English. Member Masiko.
Thank you very much. Chair, I just want to find out, this is it's a very wonderful direction for building that capacity, but how do you retain that capacity competing with the private sector? Because most of the departments, they've got an outcry of, we capacitate, but eventually we lose that capacity to the private sector because we cannot afford to be on the salary scale with the private sector. So what innovative way are you going to make sure you sustain that capacity within the department? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I also just want to latch on to those two questions before. And I just want to understand those that go through training, those staff members of ours that go through training at Cromaria, is it voluntary or are they identified at their levels? And are they identified at a level to be able to be upskilled to go to a next level? Thanks. And that's the round, DG.
Yeah, I'm going to ask the head of people management to respond to this. I mean, she's got it all in hand, and would be able to respond to it. Louise?
In terms of Chairperson, in terms of the question of Member Marais, we've got a Public Service Act and regulations that guides how we do recruitment within the public service that we have to comply with. And that act and regulations stipulate to us that we need to advertise all posts. Now, if someone is internal and apply for the post and they're successful, then they get promoted. So we have internal people that's successful through the recruitment process, and in that way they get promoted. In terms of retention salary is one way of retaining staff, but it's not the only way. What we find with research is that it stipulates that your direct supervisor has got a bigger influence in terms of you staying at the workplace or not. So if we look at organizational culture, and that's why the big drive from organizational development in terms of organizational culture, because it's got a bigger impact on retention in the workplace. So in terms of training at Cromaria, there's two different approaches. The one approach is that development needs to be self-initiated and self-owned. I need to be able to say, I want to go on this training. I would like my career to go into this direction. But there's also another part where the employer comes and say, in terms of your progression forward, we need you to attend the following training courses. So it's a combination of both processes in terms of development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You want to follow up? Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear clearly. You're saying that the retainer, maybe if you can indicate the percentage of the retainer for this department, is it not, that is full stop. Now, is it not a challenge because the supervisor can motivate to have that retainer? It is not a problem of the competition between the private sector and the government. That's what you are saying, that it's not that much a problem. In fact, if the motivation is there from the supervisor to whomever that you have skills that wants to go to the private sector, that's what we are saying, that is the case.
Chair, in terms of retention, if we look at our turnover rate in our department as well as the other departments, it's not very high. So if you've got a turnover rate that's below 10%, it's perceived as acceptable because you need to get new blood into the organization also. So it's a balance of getting new people in and your current staff moving on. So in terms of retention, our turnover rate is not above 10%. So, and I think that's a positive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Member Marie, I note you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think turnover rate is a queer way of looking at whether we've trained people sufficiently so that they can be upskilled and get promoted. I think the next time in the House, I will pose a question for written reply. What is the average time of employees that has remained at the same level of employment over the past 15 to 20 years? And then we will get to the truth. If your upskilling program works, nobody should be in the same position for 5 or 10 years at a time. Because if that was the case, no MP will ever think of being a whip or even being a minister. He'll stay an MP for the rest of his life. It doesn't happen to us. Why must it happen to officials? So I will leave the answers that I've received. For nou sal ek daarby staan, maar ek gaan 'n vraag in parlement stel vir skriftelike beantwoording van hoe lank mense in dieselfde rang en posisie en hierdie wetgewer is en waarom hulle op een plek gebly het. Dankie.
I don't know, Chair, do you want me to reply or allow maybe the member just to pose the question anyway?
If you can reply briefly, and he can use his member privilege to pose a written question.
Okay. Chair, I mean, the first thing I want to say is that training and capacity or investment into staff is not only an investment for them to stay forever at Western Cape Government. We invest in staff because we believe we invest in the person. If the person decides to stay, then obviously we reap the benefits and the citizen reaps the benefit. If the person decides to move on to greener pastures, in fact, the other institution also reap the benefit. And therefore, even when we give out bursaries and stuff, and it's wider than just going to Cromeria, the idea is always to build the individual. And what we do is we encourage people to apply for higher positions. We even identify skills in the institution where we put people on special programs to develop them, because we also need to identify talent. And in fact, this morning, myself and Mr. Jumat spoke about this whole issue around succession planning, even at senior management level. It's not going to be long, then some of us here are going to fill in our GPF retirement forms. So who are those people that's going to take over from us? And we need to identify them, build them, give them an opportunity. And the one thing I can say, and I mean, I don't have the stats here with me, but I can guess that probably 70% plus of let's call it appointments is actually through promotions in this government. I mean, we can give you the stats, but I can tell you it's definitely more than 50%, even if I just look in my own department. And promotions not only in the department, I'm talking about just wider in government, because people also circulate, because that's also a way of actually building them. So what I want to assure Member Marais is that we take training, capacity building quite serious. The number of non-performers in the institution, I think it's like less than 2%, if I'm not wrong. So Member Marais can see that we do not actually have a lot of people not performing, but when we also do the assessments, we look at the concept called the bell curve. So about 80% of our staff, operate in that realm of saying a 3, you're doing what you need to do, and then you've got this portion on the other side that's performing significantly above expectation, and only about 2% of them requires additional attention. And even that 2%, we don't tell them there's the door, leave us, you're worth nothing. We say, how can we help you? How can we build you? How can we build you to actually get to a level where we can say that you are gainfully employed? And in many of those staff members, we see the turnaround happening. So I'm quite comfortable that we're doing what we need to do to invest in our staff and actually create a career path for them in the broader Western Cape government, because that's also part of culture. And the Premier always talk about, you need to identify those people that want to put up their hand, for the next level, for the next promotion, and want to do more in the space. So I hope that will, bring some satisfaction to Member Marais. Thanks.
Can I also just add to Member Murray's question? Maybe I can save him the time of writing the question, because it's not also about you want to see people stay in a position for 2 to 3 years and then move on. Can you imagine the DG? He already has a 5-year contract, and I would hope that it gets renewed. I think he would as well. I would hope that it gets renewed, because in a government system, you also don't want to see a high turnover. You want to see a medium planned turnover, because I agree as well. You don't want to see people entrenched in positions for too long, but you also don't want to see a quick high turnover. I also want to say that you must be enabling people to come up. And I must say that I think in this government, they do it very well. And people do prepare themselves, because it's also not about the government preparing them. It's about people preparing themselves. And I just quickly was looking at HODs in our government. And there's not many HODs in our government that have been around. I mean, I'm just trying to think who's been an HOD now the longest. Brent Walters. But he's not the HOD of a single department. I mean, he's moved to another bigger department. But he also came up through the ranks. I think about the DG himself. I think about all of Mr. Paul's HOD Gooch, HOD Pillay, Dr. Sebo Petsa, Dr. Kluti. I mean, these are people that have come through the system. Of course, not everybody has come through the internal system, and even people like if I think about HOD Walters, I mean, he was in tourism, but then he left the province and he went to another. So it's about what the DG was saying. You enable people that go to another province, and then they might come back again. We've got 2 retiring, one retired and one retiring HOD, Mr. Fourie and Mr. Van Sail. And I think about, well, I don't sit on the selection panel. I observe to see who's being interviewed, and I go in as an observer. And it's great to see people coming from other departments in other provinces applying for the post, but also seeing our own officials, and they're preparing themselves. They go and study. They make sure that they are enabling their own career. So definitely it is something that we take very seriously. Also understanding the risks where you don't want to have huge cohorts of officials that are all going to be retiring at the same time. You need to make sure that you've got a staggered system that keeps institutional knowledge in it, but you're also getting new blood coming in, and you re-energizing your system. That's how we have to work, and I think our people management team do an outstanding job of enabling that in the system.
Baie dankie Premier en DG en Lid Marie. 'n Baie omvattende antwoord wat u gekry het, maar u mag nog oorweeg om 'n skriftelike vraag in te dien. Moving on, pages 31 to 40. Member Dagmo.
Thanks, Chair. Now, just as you start off again with the APP on page 30, there's a reference there to Part A, the issue of safety, that the department will continue to deliver policy and delivery execution support to the interventions in the safety plan. Now, I just wanted to ask the Premier and anyone, from the department.
And you're referencing it to page?
Page 30.
No, in the APP you say page
Yes,
30.
page
In the
30.
budget?
No, it's
You're not referencing
no,
to
it's
any. Okay,
not
all
a
right.
direct,
Let me listen
not
to
a
your
direct,
content.
direct
Okay.
link. But there's reference there to execution support and interventions. Now, my sense is that if one looks at the key pathologies that are driving this problem, at one level you have a historic gang and drugs problem on what people might describe as the historic Cape Flats. And there's that issue, and then the second issue, which I think is a more recent phenomena, is the so-called protection racket that's going on. At one level, there's the issue of, at quite a high levels, senior business people, there's been kidnappings. There's been a recent one now, some relative of someone involved in constructions. His father has just been kidnapped. But then there's a whole nother level of protection money in many of the Cape Flats and historically so-called township areas, where foreign traders and others are extorted. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of the safety plan, I'm not aware of any focus on another phenomena which I think is emerging, where it's not just protection money being asked for from traders in the township areas, but actual protection money being asked for from residents. So in other words, if you live in a certain area of Khayelitsha, for instance, and you want to make sure that your car doesn't get stolen, or if it does get stolen, it might be returned. The evidence that that I've been gathering in terms of just speaking to people is that the protection racket is now an issue of where people in a middle class suburb might pay for ADT, or they might pay for, but in the township areas, people are being asked to pay to youth gangs, basically, to protect and patrol the areas. So that is something which sort of in a way shows that whether it's neighborhood watches or community police forums are actually not effective anymore, and that youth gangs are actually extorting from ordinary residents to so-called keep that block or that group of streets safe. And I just wondered if that was something that the plan is actually addressing, because it seems to be a fairly recent phenomena, maybe the last year. That was that. And then just also on Part A, there's reference to relevant court rulings. I think Mr. Buter can possibly help us, and I'm not necessarily asking for a verbal response, but it is reported that judgments that are relevant to the department, handed down by the Court, the Supreme Court, the High Court, the Labour Appeal Court, the Labour Court, is a party to, as well as court rulings to which it is not a party, but which are relevant to provincial powers and functions. He then mentions, or not him specifically, but the report mentions that the provincial cabinet and heads of department get reports on a 6-monthly interval. So I would like to ask, is it possible that the committee can get a copy of the last report that was submitted to cabinet, which indicates these issues that are referred to in item number 5. And then if I can just go to page 46 of the annual report, which does link to the budget as well. And the DG referred to this graph. It's a graph of the disability statistics in the province, where that particular, it's actually on page 46. I think people can see it there. Table, this one, it's not table 1. I think it's table 2. Yeah. The total number of employees with disabilities only per occupational level. As at the 31st of January. Now, I looked in terms, Chair, that here's a table that gives you issues around disabilities. But then I looked in the whole document and I tried to find a similar graph which would look at representativity broadly in regard to race and gender. Now, I just want to ask, am I mistaken that there isn't such a table in this annual performance plan? Is there one or is there not one? Because I haven't been able to find it. So I would just like to ask if there is or if there isn't, because clearly what we discussed earlier, and there seems to be an acknowledgement from both the Premier and the DG that we're not as representative as we should be. So therefore one would expect in an annual performance plan that you would have a status report on what the levels are and then what would be the plan in regard to trying to improve those levels of representativity. I don't think anyone is talking about bean counting. We're talking about a representative, a more representative senior management in this department and in other departments of the province. So maybe I made a mistake, but I couldn't find any table which reflects that, as opposed to this one on disability, which is a very specific one.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks. We got the gist. I just want to check with you. That is your questions up to 40. Thank you. Member Allen?
Thank you, Chairperson. I wanted to latch on to remarks made earlier regarding cyber security. I see on page op bladsy 32, there is a cybersecurity services and infrastructure refresh, and then in the outer year it jumps for 2022-2023 it's 55 million, and then it jumps to 97 million in the next year. And I'm linking it back to the APP in terms of the current internet portal having reached its end of life. So the investment is needed. I just wanted to double check if there's any further information that the DG can clarify on that, when that process will actually commence to ensure that we do have sufficient cybersecurity in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Allen. Member Marie?
Thank you so much, Chair. Ek wil net vra aan die departement, DG en die premier, werk julle op 'n zero-based approach to budgeting of werk julle op 'n add-on? Die expenditure trends is dit iets wat net elke jaar met julle 2 of 3% bysit, of begin julle by 0 om regtig te kyk, maak ons nog meer mense of maak ons minder mense om dieselfde werk te doen? En dan wil ek vra, program 4, bladsy 30. Praat hierdie departemente met mekaar? Ek weet ons is nog besig met e-innovations. Byvoorbeeld, kan die departement welsyn, maatskaplike dienste sien? Wat gaan met in gesondheid en hospitale aan? Of is dit 'n verskillende stelsel? En weet die maatskaplike dienste as daar behoefte is met informele nedersettings of behuising, want die goed is mos in mekaar gevleg. Nou wil ek net vra, hierdie system, hierdie e-innovation, sluit dit daarbey aan dat sekere goed is tot die, ek meen, al 3 departemente van die social cluster, praat hulle met mekaar in terme van behoeftes en so aan, en of hulle kan inligting kry van die een wat hulle nie hoef buite te soek nie. Soms betaal jy vir inligting wat ons reeds het, maar omdat jy een departement op jou eie hoopie sit, vra jy nie vir 'n ander departement of hulle die kundigheid het wat jy net by hulle kan oorneem nie, as om het te gaan buite kan soek nie. Is maar net 2 vragies wat ek dink hulle behoort sommer maklik te antwoord, net om my tevrede te stel as dit moet.
En Premier.
Voorsitter, baie dankie. Miskien moet ek net vinnig begin met om te antwoord vir Raad vir lid Maree. Rondom die bladsy 30, ek kan bevestig dat departemente wel met mekaar praat. Inteendeel, ons keer ICT planne goed elke jaar, so die departemente stuur dit na Hilton se eenheid toe. En Hilton se eenheid kyk daarna en veral van 'n infrastruktuurkant af kyk ons dat daar geen departemente wat goed wil doen wat hulle of nie kan bekostig nie of goed kan doen waar ons nie noodwendig die kapasiteit het om dit te lewer nie. So binne in die ICT omgewing praat hulle definitief met mekaar want ons is verantwoordelik van 'n transversiële kant af om na al die IT goed te kyk binne die provinsie. Dan rondom die begrotings, ons gebruik nie 'n streng zero-based benadering nie. Okay, want daar sekere vaste koste komponente, soos byvoorbeeld salarisse. Een groot vaste koste komponent is byvoorbeeld die broadbandbetaling. Dis 'n kontraktuele verbintenis vir 10 jaar. Daar's baie ander kontraktuele verbintenisse wat ons het. Weet binne ons begroting veral binne in program 4 as ook basies in program 3 en dan sekere van hulle ook in program 2. Maar wat ons geïnstitusionaliseer het in die departement, ons het 'n ding wat ons noem die budgetkomitee, soos 'n begrotingskomitee. So as 'n pos vakant gaan in ons departement kan 'n programbestuurder nie net besluit hulle gaan 'n pos vul nie, dit kom terug na die begrotingskomitee toe. Dis 'n sentrale begrotingskomitee. Ek sit op die komitee, die CFO, meneer Jumat sit op die komitee en as 'n programbestuurder pos wil vul, moet hulle dit basies kom motiveer by daai komitee. So dit bring ook 'n mate van onafhanklikheid in die stelsel in en dan natuurlik as ons begroting bymekaar sit, is dit 'n proses waar ons die hele bestuurspan betrek en veral rondom sekere skuwe. So ons besluit ook voor die tyd, luister, volgende jaar is ons 'n strategie dit, so as ons 'n basis na die tesourier toe gaan en vra vir addisionele geld, is dit gebaseer daarop. So I mean we take a lot of our guide also from where government generally wants to go, obviously our guide from cabinet, our guide from the premier, and then we decide how we want to dish our money or rather prioritize our funding. On the question of cybersecurity, I mean, if you look at program 4 on page 32, Member Allen, you can see that the total allocation jumped basically from about just more than 1.1 million audited 2020-2021 to about 1.2 million estimated for this year to 1.245, and most of the additional money obviously relates to upping our game in cybersecurity. So the Treasury has set aside 55 million for us for this year, and that number almost doubled in the middle year to 97, and then again 88 million to deal with the issue of cybersecurity. So you can see it's really strengthening what we want to do in cybersecurity. But again, as I've indicated early on, as with broadband, maybe we can make a joint presentation on broadband and cybersecurity for the committee to have a broader understanding of what's happening. Then on page 46, the table that Member Dugmore is referring to, that table is not prescribed. And I mean, we do provide a table like that when we table our annual report, because there's a whole section that deals with HR. So we've looked at what's prescribed in terms of the different formats, and a table like that is not prescribed, and therefore it is definitely not in our APP. But I mean, we can reconstruct it if the committee really wants to have those numbers. It's really push of a button, and we can supply it because Louise has got all that data at the tip of at the tip of her fingers. Then I'm going to ask Lucas maybe to respond to the issue that Member Dugmore raised in terms of the report on update on court rulings. I mean, we also need to get him to say something, to know that at least he earns his salary. So on page 30, Lucas.
Thank you, DG, and thank you, Honourable Member Dugmore, for finally asking me something. Yes, I mean, certainly we can make a copy of that report available. I don't think there's anything in there that is not something that we could provide to you. I think it's there's nothing to hide. You will also note that it's quite bulky because I think, and the Premier knows because he has to sit through it when we present to Cabinet, but it's actually quite comprehensive around the judgments, because if something is relevant, I include it and they'll just have to listen to me while I present the report to them in Cabinet. So, but we can certainly make that available. Thanks.
Thank you, Lucas. I'm going to ask Dr. Fast, because I mean, she hasn't also said something as yet, to just speak on the issue of youth gangs, the protection stuff, and what we're doing as part of the safety plans, and maybe just touch on the issues around the area-based teams and the data that underpins it.
Sure, thanks. So the safety plan has a number of components, and it's broken into three main components. The one component is law enforcement, the other is violence prevention, and then the last one is urban design and safety, because all of those three work together to achieve a safer society. So with respect to issues around law enforcement, we have established 16 area-based teams, and 11 of them are in high crime areas in the metro, and 5 are outside the metro, also in high crime areas. And in these area-based teams, we have something called the LETAT, which is a law enforcement assessment team, and it comprises SAPS as well as law enforcement from the city, as well as officials from the province. And they get together regularly to find out in their particular areas. And of course, the extortion will be primarily focused in the high crime areas, which represent over 50% of all of the violent crimes that take place in the province. And they together assess what is happening in their area, and then they decide on a particular strategy. I mean, an earlier question that was asked is to what extent are we being evidence and data led, and are there specific programs? And one of the successes we've been experiencing is to take the data, especially from our health sector, and to be able to map out where different crimes are happening of a violent nature within a particular physical area. And then there's a joint plan that's developed in those 16 areas by the law enforcement teams between the different law enforcement agencies to then address it. This is just by way of indicating that if extortion is an issue in a particular area, that will serve at that particular coordination forum, and it will be then there will be a plan that is being addressed. The data is also leading us in the direction of focusing where the crime fighting efforts should be focused time-wise, and so we have found that the majority of crimes are taking place on Saturday nights into Sunday morning. And so we then increase, we work together with the city to increase the law enforcement officers who are deployed at certain times in the areas where we've already identified these things taking place. In addition to that, I'm aware that the SAPS is developing or has developed a strategy specifically around extortion. I can't provide you with the specific details, except to say that in these 16 areas, that would be one of the many issues that is addressed.
Is that it? Maybe I should request just from Mr. Buter just to give us a summarized version and not the entire report.
Even create more work for Mr. Buter.
It wouldn't.
If he has already prepared a detailed thing with the budget, now if he has to summarize it, that's more work. If there's not political or sensitive
Okay,
issues,
I get you. Thank you.
I'm trying to save Mr.
Yeah,
Buter.
you're trying to save, so Mr. Buter will get that full report. Okay. All right, members, I note members Alan and Marie's hands are still raised.
Looks like
Thank you so much, Chair Lady. I don't know what to say. You are so shall I say, kind towards me to give me another chance. I'm concerned by the crime statistics, and I'd like to know, what are we training the police for? I assume it's Metro Police. Because crime recorded by SAP show serious crime has risen. And in 2018-29, it was 436,428. And the focus was on firearms, drugs, and liquor, murder, and so on. A 10-year trend on serious crimes showed that it went up from 2308 in the Western Cape to 3975. Now, my question, what are we training our police for? Can we say this is a secondary school before you go to high school? High school being SAPs. Does the curriculum of training Metro Police make them to stand first in the queue if they should decide to apply for a position at SAPs? Will they be sufficiently trained in police work so that they are the first go-to for new recruits for SAPs? I wanted to propose this, but I think it's better if I approach it in this committee. The Premier can speak to his minister to consider it, and to the Metro Mayor. If we train our Metro Police and consider that an entry level for South African police, then we will be a feeding chain for well-trained policemen at national level. Do you think that would be possibly a good idea? Thank you.
Easy.
Chair, no, I hear what Member Maria is saying. I think it's a bit more difficult in practice. In fact, what we're getting in practice is that people are trained by SAPs, the different colleges, and then I think even some of the employment conditions are not appropriate, and then they apply to the Metro Police for a job at the city. What we need to get right is something bigger, and what we need to get right is for these law enforcement agencies to have a common approach, but a common agenda to address crime. I mean, we're doing a lot from our side. In fact, Minister Mania in his budget, I think he indicated an amount of 4 billion that's going to be allocated towards safety. Just on the LEAP stuff, I think that's close to R1 billion over the next 3 years, and that's an investment that we're making into making, particularly Cape Town, much more safer, in addition to what the city is putting in. And if you add on top of that what gets spent by SAPs, what gets spent by all of us potentially to pay ADT and all this stuff, it adds up to billions of rand that we're spending on safety. But what we're missing is a coherent approach by all these agencies. And hopefully our safety plan, being the only one in the country, will pull a lot of these initiatives together. So as an example, we had a safety manco this morning, and who's represented there is our own department, community safety, obviously Premier and the executive, the City of Cape Town, SAPS also sits there. And in fact, in many of these meetings, we even pull in, the district municipalities, because they've got all these district safety officers and stuff. So it needs to be a coherent plan for the entire province. And only if we've got that, then we're going to see a consistent drop. Also remembering that our safety plans, main objective is to halve the murder rate. So it's also a targeted approach. And sometimes you've got these petty crimes that sometimes add up to people eventually murdering each other. And that's the issue that we want to address. So I don't know if Premier maybe wants to also add.
So can I also add, I mean, I agree with actually what Dee said, but I can add that sometimes you see SAPS officers actually applying for Metro Police positions. And the Metro Police training is quite a comprehensive training program. We also, you mustn't forget the traffic officials at our own training program. They also play a role. And we're looking at how we link the two, and that's where the peace officer designation comes in. But in his question about a pipeline of skills, law enforcement officers are definitely a pipeline of skills, and law enforcement officers definitely apply to become metro police officers. And you definitely see that pipeline, and also police officers. You see that pipeline as well. Obviously, they are much longer. The training is a longer, more comprehensive training program. So, I mean, what he says actually is happening already, but from law enforcement going into metro and into SAPS.
Thank you very much for that responses, members. I'm on the last pages 41 to 51.
Thanks, Chair. Chair, I'm just to refer the department to page 49. All these annexures on, provincial payments and estimates. Maybe it's just a difficulty reading because it seems to be almost a compliance issue in terms of how these figures are tabulated. But could you just explain to me when it, for instance, says provincial payments and estimates by district and local, then you have the metro there at the top of page 49, 1.7 billion, and then the Cape Winelands is 39. And then if you go down other payments, sort of, executive governance is just 103 million, and then the same for, the district and local municipality. Is the implication of that basically these services apply to everyone? I mean, is it just like an estimate, basically? I'm just trying to get a sense of what's the logic. And if you go over the page to 50, you would see there under people management, for instance, you would have 170 million estimate towards the metro, and then 39 million towards Cape Winelands. And then, for instance, in Centre for E-Innovation, you would literally have the same amount, 1.25, 1.25. So there doesn't appear to be, and then on the next one, A35, corporate assurance, it's the same for the metro, and then the same for the districts and the municipality. So I'm just trying to understand what is the purpose really of the reporting in this way. Are these literally just estimates, or how do you arrive at those figures? Because they're not particularly helpful. I'm just wondering why, those reports are happening in that format. And then the last general question that I have on the APP is around the technical indicator descriptions. I'm not sure, is this a new innovation? Is this the first time in the APPs we're dealing with technical indicator descriptions? Maybe I've missed something, but is this the first time that we're dealing with it? Because it just seems that it's quite detailed. I don't know if it was called something else before, but I note the work, and generally I think it's useful, the ones that I've been able just to look at quickly in terms of assigning responsibility and so on. But I just wanted to know, since when have these technical indicator descriptions come in, or did they have another name before?
Thanks.
Maybe I missed
DG?
Yeah, and the last question, they've always been there. And I mean, their main purpose, as Member Dugmore said, is actually to give more information. So they complement the tables that's in front of the book. So the tables in front of the book would just say to you, what's your output indicator? But then when you go to the back, in terms of the technical descriptors, it gives you a little bit more information. So I can, as an example, say number of reports to cabinet. But what the technical indicator then will say is that how much that report look like, what will be in there, who will deliver it, by when will you do it, is it cumulative, what's the reporting cycle, and what's the desired kind of, so it gives you a little bit more information. So it's really a management tool that's been part of the APPs, but I think why maybe Member Dugmore sees it this time around is, I think what we're doing also in the department is to, on an annual basis, actually improve the quality of it, because it's actually a very nice management tool. So if you get confused maybe with the quality of the indicator, then you just go to the back and it gives you a little bit more information. And in fact, the Auditor General actually used the TIDS, as we call it, to actually look at some of our output stuff. So they literally go to it and say, okay, what were you supposed to do? And the detail sits there. On the tables, that's part of the annexes. I mean, because you can probably also come in here. These tables are really just an indication of where you're going to spend your money from a regional perspective. So it's really a regional indicator that's linked to our basic accounting system, and it links it to the payments. So they really just indicate where are you going to spend most of your money. And what you can see, Chair, from these tables is that from the 1.8 billion, we're going to spend about 1.78 billion within the metro area. The issue, obviously, with these tables, and it's a transversal issue, and it's prescribed by the National Treasury budget formats, is that you get this thing that we call a head office syndrome. So most of the people gets paid from the center. They may not necessarily live here all the time. So we've got, as an example, an office in George, but we pay the people from the center. So Purcell would pick up that the pay point is, let's say, 061. It's in the city of Cape Town in the metro. And it's really, if you pull together the entire spending statistics, you know, of government and even the private sector, a lot of it is based on this thing called a regional indicator. It's not faultless. There are little issues, but it's really on the margin. So what I'm saying is that most of our expenditure takes place. And I mean, I'm sure Driekus can probably even in his head say, you know, this payment of 39 million to Cape Winelands municipalities, Stellenbosch in particular, it's probably a project that we're doing, you know, in that particular municipality. And I think that particular spending is in program 3, people management. So there should be something. And I think it's probably the people that's maybe in Cromeria, because Cromeria sits out in Stellenbosch. So most of the spending takes place in Stellenbosch. So it's a regional indicator. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I note Member Maseko and then Member Marie.
Chair, I'm not going to be long. I just want to find out on the program indicators on the APP page 92. So on the corporate communication, and acknowledging that you talked about the citizen-centric culture, which is more of the listening to the communities. Now you say on number of brand assessment reports generated, the target is is that going to be the internal and the external one report? Because when I look at the 5.5.2 for the number of reports on the improvement in public trust, the target is 2. So I'm trying to find out, and also on the reports on the improvement of staff ability for the brand, it's 2 also. So is that the total of that? Am I reading it correctly that way, or it's different to the way I'm reading it?
Thank you, Member Marie.
Thank you so much. I notice it's the budget of the Cape Winelands compared to that of the Metro. Now, statistics show that the Metro has 80% more people living here than in the Winelands, Cape Winelands. Now, more citizens here, as in the second most populated district is the Cape Winelands. And is our strategy to have an overflowing metro where there's no more place for people, or are we going to decentralize and develop the areas outside the metro so people stay there and don't come to the metro? Because there's no more place. We're a cul-de-sac in any case. If you come to Cape Town, you must turn around. You can't go through Table Mountain. It's a cul-de-sac. So more and more people come here and they squat here. Why don't we turn the budget around and give more money to the Cape Winelands and outlying Stellenbosch areas so that urbanization is not coming to Cape Town? Urbanization is staying where you are outside the metro and still feel urbanized. Is that the broad policy? Has the Premier thought of it? That we must develop Stellenbosch, we must develop Worcester and those places so that urbanization means people move from the platteland towards Worcester and towards Stellenbosch and those areas and not necessarily come to Sea Point. Just a question.
Member Dugmore, you still wanted to follow up quickly?
Yeah, just to follow up. Now, I was just trying to use a practical. I hear what the DG is saying about these tables, but like let's have a look at A34 on page 50, Center for E-Innovation. For instance, there you have 1.2 allocated as an estimate for the metro, and then exactly the same amount total provincial expenditure by district and local. So, I mean, how is that figure actually arrived at? Isn't it? I mean, it just really seems to be a compliance thing. I'm trying to understand what is the meaning of that, because it's not just on you use an example of per cell payments, but obviously Center for E-Innovation is doing broadband and X, Y, and Z. So is that more or less just saying that of the entire CEI budget, basically they're spending it all over the province? I mean, because I'm trying to work out what is the meaning of what does that tell you? If otherwise, but does this seem to be just, is this really compliance, or is there any real meaning to that figure? Because I just find difficulty understanding why those amounts are for both the metro and then it's the whole. So there's not a distinction between metro and non-metro, the same amount. So I'd like to know what that means, if anything.
DG, before you respond, I see Member Murray's hand is still raised. Is that legacy or please lower? Then DG, if you can respond.
Chair, maybe I should just respond quickly to Member Dugmore. I mean, it's an issue on the system. It's really where you make the payments. I mean, and again, I think it's not a perfect tool, but the system picks up that you make all the payments, as example, from head office, and that's why I call this issue of the head office syndrome. I mean, a perfect thing would probably to say, you know, where's the money spent? But I mean, we pay all our payments primarily, you know, from the Cape Town office. But it's something that I think one should probably work with PT, because I mean, it is a prescribed table, and maybe something that, you know, PT should try and just improve on a little bit. Then on the questions that's been asked by Member Masego on the comms target, on page 92, the number of brand assessments reports that we want to deliver for the year is 4, Member Masego, and that 4 is broken down into 1 report each quarter. And then if you go to page 164, there you will see the detail on those reports. So that indicator refers to the number of reports issued to the heads of communication and heads of department. The report will contain the quarterly peer review of communications material created and published on brand and on message by Western Cape Government. And if you go a little bit down to more or less the middle of the page, you will see a reporting cycle is quarterly. And then obviously there's the issue around, you know, how do we calculate it? So, and it's cumulative. So it means it's 1 + 1 + 1 + 1, and it's 4 by the end of the year. And we even say when we're going to do it. So the Q1 report will contain the data for April, May and June, and then it goes on to Q2, Q3, Q4. So again, it comes back to the previous example. It just gives you a lot more information than what's simply set out on page 92. It's an internal one, yes. Yeah, it's an internal report. And then on the issue raised by Member Maria asked very difficult questions today. I think it's difficult to control people's movement. I mean, the human being will go where there are opportunities, not just for yourself, but also for your family and your children. And people have moved, and I mean, we don't have kind of locked borders or boundaries. I mean, people can move in the country wherever they want to, and they go after economic opportunities. What we need to do is we need to create further opportunities. And obviously, when you create opportunities, you get more people coming into the province. So even if you look at some of the projections in terms of growth numbers, I mean, we're going to see serious growth over the next 10 years in terms of population ourselves and Gauteng primarily. And that is primarily because of the opportunities. So if we can make this province safer, if we can provide a little bit more in terms of people's well-being, if we can create jobs, we can be sure, you know, that more people will come. But the key thing is we're not only attracting people that's not going to be active in the economy. I mean, you attract both sides. We attract people that can be active in the economy. And I mean, if we can provide those kind of services to the citizens, I mean, we'll do our best to do that. Thanks.
I want to add to that from the Honourable Marais question. And I mean, what he's saying here is to try and, create or buck the trend. So if you read the reports from the United Nations on migration to cities, in 1950, 30% of the world's population lived in cities. The rest lived across the world in rural areas. At the moment, that's gone from 30% to 54% of citizens across the world live in cities. Within the next 30 years, their prediction is that 75% of the world's population will be living in cities for exactly the points that, or the reasons that the DG highlighted. In actual fact, at the moment, an unprecedented 3 million people in the world move into cities every week across the world, 3 million people. The one mechanism that is starting to create a trend that is bucking that movement is the effects of COVID-19. So now suddenly people can remotely work, only certain people, but people can remotely work from home. So suddenly you will see people who maybe used to come into the city every single day are now moving to smaller towns on our coast, because they can actually work from home. They don't have to be in the office every day. So you're seeing a little bit of movement into some of our rural areas. And that's mainly because of what COVID-19 did in pushing forward the fourth industrial revolution. But I don't know if that's going to be sufficient to buck the trend. I personally don't think so. People come to cities because that's where opportunities lie. From hospitals, schools. I mean, we see it in this province. That's exactly what people come here for. They come here for education purposes. They come here for medical reasons. They come here for employment opportunities or investment opportunities. Doesn't matter who you are. You come here because there are opportunities. And I don't know if we'd want to turn that around. We actually welcome people to come here because we want their skills. We want their ability to take part in this economy. We want to. And of course, it's tough because we've got a budget and we've got to build schools and we've got to build hospitals. But I promise you, it's much better to have people coming to your province than people leaving your province. Every time taxpayers leave your province, it puts you in a more difficult position.
Thank you very much. Members, we have come to the end of the deliberations on vote 1 on the appropriation. The Premier and to the DG and all the staff of the Department of the Premier who has been present with us in the chamber today. Thank you very much. Thanks for the hard work that went into the setup of the budget. And thank you for allowing us to ask the questions that we have posed to you and that you have responded diligently to the questions posed. And thank you to the members who have prepared themselves asking the questions that. And I want to say that going forward in regard to the committee, where we can and where it is befitting, we will follow the money and go and see in practice what is happening out there as it is stated. And Premier and DG, I'm giving you a few minutes for closing remarks. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. And obviously those issues that we still owe you in writing, we've made notes of that and we'll send you through the reports or the details that you need still. And of course, anytime. Well, we're very happy to come to this committee. Can I also then use the opportunity to thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about our budget and our plans for the year forward. And Chair, I also would like to take the opportunity to thank the DG and the whole .P team for a team of very dedicated officials that really work damn hard in the interests of the citizens of this province. And I want to thank them for for their hard work and dedication. We are citizen-centered and citizen-centric. That's what we've got to be. Our job is to make sure that we continually focus on making life better here in this province. And I know I perhaps also sometimes disrupt systems a bit too much, but thank them for accepting the disruption too, because we also can't just do the same thing over and over again. Sometimes we've got to do things a bit differently. And I thank them for the way in which they take the disruption too. Thank you.
Chair, from our side, thank you to you and the members of Parliament. And then I want to say thank you to each member of the Department of the Premier. I mean, it's an exceptional team. It's really an honor for me to work with them. I mean, you can see the quality of our APP has just gone to a different level. Obviously, it's the start of a new financial year, and it means that once you've tabled these things, it's about getting back to work and making sure that we deliver on it. So in anticipation, I'm already saying thank you to an amazing team. And then to the Premier, I think, for his exemplary leadership and for his guidance and for disrupting us now and then. And then obviously for what you're doing. And we will gladly go and show you some of the stuff that we're doing in this department. We're proud of it, and it makes a difference to the citizens out there. And I mean, you can see, Chair, I think what's different also in our APP, particularly this year, is all the pictures in this APP is of our own staff members at work, busy making a difference in the lives of people. So from our side, once again, thank you.
Thank you very much. You are excused from the chambers. Members, you stay behind, and please go well and be safe out there. Oh. Good. Okay, members, we thank you very much for your participation this afternoon. I think consideration and the adoption of the draft report. Remember, in the draft report, our recommendations will not reflect there. Our recommendations will reflect in the minutes of this meeting. So in regard to the draft report, the draft report of the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters on Vote 1 Premier in the schedule to the Western Cape Appropriation Bill B2 2022, dated 16 March 2022. The report will read as follows. The Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters reports. Okay, now I will do it now in this. Okay, so, and I will give the options now. The Standing Committee on the Premier and Okay. I don't know why it's a new mic here. I don't know. Sorry. Let me go through that again. The Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters reports that it has concluded its deliberations on vote 1 Premier to the Western Cape Appropriation Bill B2 2022, referred to the committee in terms of Standing Rule 188, and that so it's two options: supports, does not support the vote, refer to it. Okay. So that's the option that we go to. So members, we now have to adopt. Member Maseko.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I propose that we adopt the report.
I also note Member Allen's hand. Are you, Member Maseko, in regard to adopting the report, are you proposing support or does not support the vote? Member Maseko.
Chair, I propose that we support the vote and adopt the report.
Okay, all right, thank you. For clarity, Member Allen.
Hi, Chairperson. I duly second the support for this particular vote, and I will encourage the entire committee to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Allen. Members, in regard to Member Dagmo, I note you.
Chair, if you could just record the minority position of the ANC in terms of the relevant rule that we do not support this vote. I think it's, is it
Okay.
19?
Okay, then in regard to this committee adopting this report, it will then read, the Standing Committee on the Premier and Constitutional Matters reports that it has concluded its deliberations on Vote 1, Premier in the schedule to the Western Cape Appropriation Bill B2 2022, refer to the committee in terms of Standing Rule 188 and that it supports the vote referred to it. Then in terms of Standing Rule 90, the African National Congress expresses its view, its minority view, to not support the vote.
Yeah.
Is that correct? All right. Okay. Okay, so that is our report. Are we done what we're supposed to do in terms of the report? Okay. Then in regard to the minutes that has been circulated to you, so the minutes that has been circulated to you is dated 23 February 2022. And it was members present, just check on that as it is listed there. And then I go to page 1 and I go to page 2. Okay, members, and then I request of you a proposal to adopt. Member Maseko.
Thank you, Chair. I propose that we adopt the minutes.
Thank you very much. And I note Member Allen.
Seconded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. And then therefore the minutes is duly adopted. Now we go to the resolutions for this meeting today. So any resolutions? I'm going to start with the members in the chamber and then I will move to the members that are on the Teams platform. Member Maseko?
Okay, I don't have any resolution
Member
besides all the
besides?
Besides all the information that the department
Has been
committed to
requested.
send to us.
Okay, Member Dago?
Chair, wonder, could I propose that the committee coordinator just read out what she has recorded in terms of information requested, and then if there's any gaps, then I'll just, that's all I want to really add, information.
Sure. We can go that route. Members, I just want you to be mindful also that we attach a timeline if there is information that we from the department.
Thank you, Chairperson, through you. The committee requested a presentation by the Department of the Premier on cybersecurity, as well as an update on broadband, and then an update of the cases of the FIU cases, a summary of the cases and what prompted those investigations, a copy of the policy that's for combating of GBV and sexual harassment, also the post in the Premier's office, a list of the posts in the Premier's office, as well as the special advisors in accordance to the ministerial handbook, as per, that's what the book says, but Member Dagmo referred to as the provincial handbook. but I will just double check with them. And then the salary breakdown for these posts. And then an update on the relevant court rulings, a copy of this report that is tabled to Cabinet and the heads of cabinets. And then also representation. Okay, that's all from my side, Chairperson. Is there anything else in the members must just
Members, if that do you want anything else to be added to what the procedural officer that just read?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Chair, if we could just have an updated table which reflects on the representativity of senior management in the department. I mean, they did respond that they would, you know, in the annual report they normally, but if we could just have a copy of, because with the disabled, they had it as of something January 2022. So just a reflection of the current representativity of senior management and a list of what vacancies exist in senior management. And then in the response to the question I raised about crime, the official referred to 16 areas or active areas. If we could just have a list of what those areas are, but in the interest of cooperation and of time, I'm not going to be more difficult at this stage. So I'm going to say that that's all I'm going to ask for now.
Are we expecting difficulty going forward?
Don't plan to be difficult.
You said not at this stage.
I'll tell you if I'm going to be difficult.
Member Prankas?
Thank you, Chair. Chair. Oh, maybe.
Yeah, just if they could give it, you know, I asked about the payments that they estimate making to Liquid Telecom. If they could just provide the amounts that were paid last year for both the, as they describe it, the broadband and the Wi-Fi hotspots, and then also the actual figures which they expect this year. I think he said 464, but you could have that in writing.
You don't want to put a hold on that until we get the broadband presentation.
That's a good idea.
Yeah,
I'll do that.
Thanks. Okay, thanks. Member Brankhuis?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, in terms of the cybersecurity breaches that took place that the Premier mentioned, the cybersecurity breaches took place at WCPP, and the Premier mentioned also one or two other municipalities in the Western Cape, but because of the sensitivity of the day sitting, and it is a public sitting, so it's on YouTube Live, they didn't want to discuss details. So you can get some of the details that specifically which municipality or municipalities security that was breached and WCPP's own security, cybersecurity breaches. The Premier mentioned that it happens often. How often does it happen?
Okay, maybe on that one, I want to ask, and that ties in with Member Dugmore. Your recommendation ties in with the broadband one. And remember, there was a proposal that we do the two presentations together, the broadband and the cyber crime one. So I want to ask whether we should not then revise the recommendation and say our very next committee meeting that we have a presentation on the broadband and the cyber. Just Member Brankhuis, he wants to.
Thank you, Chair. Again, in the next meeting, I think the committee meeting will probably be also broadcasted live on YouTube. So when the department present information like that, I don't know how it's going to be possible for them to discuss with us details in that regard, because most of our committee meetings is live on YouTube. So if accommodation of that can be arranged, you know, for the details around the security breaches. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm just going to ask the procedural officer to guide us in that.
So the department advised or informed you that they can do a presentation, a cybersecurity presentation. So let them give the presentation, and if there's anything that's sensitive, the committee can make a resolution to go into in camera. That's when we switch everything off and everything like that, if it's like sensitive information. But when they actually when they suggested that they can give a presentation on cybersecurity, I'm sure then it was something that they can make it public, that's open to the public. So they'll obviously give the information. But if the committee feels the need to know like more in detail information, the committee can at that moment make a resolution to go into in camera, and then that information can be divulged to the committee, and all recordings will be switched off and stuff. Thank you.
Is that all right with you? Okay, thank you.
I think you covered me. I was going to request that maybe on that we need to just do a close so that we can get all the information. But again, maybe with the resolutions, as we see all of them, there might be some of the issues that we can populate our program with to have an engagement rather than just receiving the documents. Or two, it can be the option of we receive those documents, and from what we see is then that we can be able to populate our program for the standing committee.
Thank you. Member Dagmo, you.
It's just like a procedural issue for the committee as a whole. I don't have an issue with that, but I just wanted to ask you as the chair, when are we going to have a meeting where we can actually look at the program? Because I don't have an issue of asking for presentation on the Center for E-Innovation, latest update. I agree with that, but I'm just worried that we're going on in an ad hoc way, like you're saying, the next meeting. So could you just indicate to the committee when would we be meeting to look at the program for the year? It's the same issue I'm going to raise in local government. You've just been elected, and I appreciate that. But so I don't have an issue if we agree that at the next meeting we have that presentation, but could we also then at that meeting discuss the program for the year? In this committee, we've got to deal with the remaining public hearings on the environmental commissioner. You asked for a visit to Macassar and all of that. So I support that, but if then at that next meeting, we can also discuss ideas for the program for the year. That's what I want to ask.
Okay, in regard to you, do you want to say something, maybe Masiko?
Yeah, Chair, I was just asking that maybe the procedural officer can indicate if maybe we can get firstly the draft committee program like we usually do, and then we'll have a look rather than having a meeting to come and do that. It will help, it'll make life easier for.
Okay, the draft program as it is, I don't have an issue that we discuss it. So maybe the very next meeting where I say we get a presentation on cyber security as well as the broadband. Maybe we can buy out half an hour before and then go through the draft program and look at the draft program and then have consensus on the draft program. So I would say that we do it that way. The very next meeting that we have, we'll add on half an hour so that we can start with that first as a committee and then go on with the department in terms of presentations. And no hands on the virtual platform. Members, then that leaves me to say thank you very much to you for joining the standing committee meeting. And I think we had a very disciplined and diligent meeting, and let the APP be our guide as we go forward. What? Why are you so... Yes, it's this microphone. Yeah. You just want me to say it again, don't you? Yeah. We have the next set of meetings. We are in chambers or virtual chambers, and then we have constituency period, and then only I would gather in May we meet. If I look at the program, if I visualize the program. Yes, yes. I just want to ask members if we could give timelines to what we have requested, And would it be fair if we say that we get all the information, keeping in mind the constituency period that we are going through now? If we say at the end of April, we are furnished with all the information, that will then give us enough time to go through it before we get on. But members, I need to say to you, thank you very much for your presence and for your preparedness for this meeting. This standing committee meeting on the Department of the Premier and Constitutional Matters is now adjourned. Members Marie and Alan, thank you for gracing us on the virtual platform. To Wasima and Masintle, thank you very much. And to Siraj, thank you for the IT support this afternoon. Members, go well, drive safe, and keep safe. Thank you.